Lord of Mystery, I Married the Queen of Mystery by author Huo Yang. Chapter 26-50. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 26, Things Are Not Going Well Lately. In an abandoned West Balam shipyard, Marich, a member of the Temperance faction of the Rose School, began his battle with Jason, a zombie, and Tyrell, a werewolf, from the Indulgence School. Marich, who had been fleeing, suddenly turned around, pulled out a black revolver, and fired 6 shots at Jason and Tyrell. Initially, upon seeing the revolver, the two members of the Indulgence School didn't pay much mind to it. Both the zombie and the werewolf possessed excellent defensive capabilities, and ordinary pistol bullets couldn't even penetrate their skin. But the moment the bullets were fired, they were both somewhat stunned and instinctively dodged, because what shot out of the revolver were 6 small fireballs. Marich was mainly attacking Tyrell, the werewolf. As they were close, 3 bullets hit the werewolf, whose entire upper body was engulfed in flames, his clothes and body hair instantly igniting. Marich's left hand, which wasn't holding the gun, suddenly grew long nails, and he fiercely rushed forward, stabbing them into Tyrell's chest. Jason quickly went to rescue him, but Marich's pistol had already been replaced by a pure white scepter, and all 3 individuals present were weakened to some extent. Marich raised his hand, and a purifying slash struck Jason, cutting a deep golden wound into his chest. The golden color quickly faded, turning to scorched black, and Jason's face became even paler. He took 2 steps back. The purifying slash had a certain restraining effect on him. But he also knew that at this moment, he had to rescue Tyrell at all costs, so he endured the severe pain and continued to advance. At this moment, a figure appeared in his eyes, a woman in a long black court dress, with light golden hair and a delicate face. That was Sharon, the Wraith. Jason was possessed. He fiercely gripped his own neck. Seizing this opportunity, Marich dug out Tyrell's heart, which was the werewolf's only weakness. The flames on Tyrell's body had gradually diminished. He covered his chest in horror, feeling his strength rapidly fading. At this moment, the red accessory on Tyrell's body attracted the attention of Sharon, Marich, and Klein. Tyrell's clothes were mostly burned away, but the exquisite accessory remained undamaged. It was shaped like a full moon, encircled by numerous black and red gemstones, with the symbol of the moon and various mysterious markings in the center. That was the Crimson Moon Coronet. Klein and the other 2 had not expected the enemy to entrust this sealed artifact to Tyrell, who was of the lowest sequence. But with a shift in thought, they realized that this was indeed surprising enough. According to the previous plan, Sharon was definitely going to possess Jason, a sequence 6, and Marich would also block Tyrell's support while ganging up on Jason. If Tyrell were to bring out the Crimson Moon Coronet, at that moment, both Sharon and Marich would be weakened. The enemy's Sequence 5 Wraith would certainly seize such an opportunity to attack, and in that scenario, the situation would be very passive for Sharon's side. Fortunately, last night Klein had witnessed the power of the Flamebolt and the Scepter, and he had rented them from the Hermit. At the time, Klein's idea was simple. Jason, the zombie, wasn't afraid of fire, but he would instinctively dodge the Flamebolt's bullets. Since Marich did not possess fire abilities and had not used this Beander weapon before, Jason would certainly first observe the weapon in Marich's hand. This created an opportunity to inflict damage on Tyrell. So they temporarily changed their plan, and Marich used these 2 magical items to try and kill Tyrell first. The actual combat went more smoothly than planned. The Flamebolt would not cause any substantial damage to a Sequence 6, but for Tyrell, a Sequence 7, it would obstruct his vision and affect his judgment for 2 or 3 seconds. Another unexpected development was that the Crimson Moon Coronet was with Tyrell. Marich rushed forward to seize the Crimson Moon Coronet, when Klein suddenly made a move, firing at the ground not far from Marich. The enchanted bullet forced the Wraith, Steve, who was about to possess Marich, out of the empty space. Marich rushed forward, trying to hold Steve back. Klein, using Flame Jump, leapt to the side of the werewolf, Tyrell, who had not yet completely extinguished, and obtained the Crimson Moon Coronet. After that, the battle had no suspense. Klein weakened the 2 enemies, Steve and Jason. Sharon first sent Jason into the Netherworld Gate. Then the 3 of them ganged up on Steve. Although this Wraith still had a magical item, it was useless, and he was quickly killed outright. In this battle, Klein obtained rich spoils. While clearing the battlefield, Marich handed the scepter, the Flamebolt, and the already prepared £120 in cash to Klein, saying, "I must say, this was a very worthwhile transaction." He asked Klein, "Can I buy the flamebolt?" He didn't particularly like that scepter because he would also be weakened when using it. Klein replied, "I'll ask for you." In the early morning, Odysseus stretched vigorously, his spirit and physical strength well recovered, and prepared to go out to find a coffee shop for breakfast. No mistake, one shot, one content, one by one. Unexpectedly, as soon as he arrived at the shop in front, someone knocked on the door. Odysseus checked his pocket watch, it was only a little past 7. Someone was already here to buy herbs. He opened the door and saw that it was Max. The machinery hivemind team leader, whose facial features were sharply defined, observed Odysseus for a few seconds before smiling. "You look well." "Not bad," Odysseus said with a wry smile. The promotion process was indeed more dangerous than I imagined. He knew his good friend had come to check on his condition. Max handed Odysseus a craft paper bag, freshly bought red bean toast. "Perfect, I was just wondering how to solve the breakfast problem." Odysseus poked the stove fire, started boiling some water, chatted with his good friend, and went to grind coffee. "Backland hasn't been peaceful lately," Max said, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. "Another Beander battle occurred in the dock area yesterday." He held the cigarette in one hand and closed the shop door with the other. Captain Eakinser paid a considerable price to learn that it was likely an internal battle within the Rose School. Among them appeared a woman in a long black court dress with light golden hair, a man who could manipulate corpses and seemed to have a layer of black hair on his body, and a man with painted face and wearing a double-breasted long formal suit. Odysseus's coffee-making motions did not pause. "Are there portraits?" "You might not know, but a sequence 7 of that pathway has very strong anti-divination abilities," Max said with a helpless smile. "Especially that man with the painted face. Even when we used a sealed artifact, we couldn't make out specific information like hair color or height. Of course, it couldn't be seen clearly." Odysseus thought to himself, "Since Captain Eakinser paid the price, then the sealed artifact you used must be Rhodes' mirror. That guy is the fool's lackey. Even without the interference from above the gray fog, he wouldn't possibly let you get useful information." Chapter 27 Fight Club. "I'll keep an eye out for clues in that regard," Odysseus said, handing Max a hot cup of coffee. "I remember you saying you had an acquaintance at the Backland Fighting Club." Max immediately understood that Odysseus planned to go to the club to practice fighting and combat. "Leave this matter to me." Members of the machinery hivemind team also needed to learn and practice combat, so they sought cooperation with the fighting club. Odysseus nodded, then took his cup of coffee, sat behind the counter, and enjoyed his breakfast. After seeing off his good friend Max, Odysseus planned to rest a bit this afternoon, but as soon as his assistant Cain arrived, the image of Fool in the world appeared in his mind again. "Great Mr. Fool," the world said devoutly, "please have Hermit prepare the ritual to receive the weapons rented yesterday, as well as the rent. I also want to ask if he has any intention of selling the flamebolt." Odysseus had no choice but to quickly go to the laboratory, take out 2 candles and place them on either side of the table, draw the corresponding symbols, and build a spirituality wall. Lighting the candles and dripping his homemade essential oil, Odysseus began to softly chant the fool's honorific name, performing the bestowal ritual. Soon, the candle representing Mr. Fool suddenly swelled, forming 2 illusory, mysterious grand doors above the flame. The doors opened slightly, and a brilliant light suddenly appeared on the altar. As the light gradually faded, 2 Beander weapons and £100 in cash were revealed. The rent for the scepter was £50, and the rent for the flamebolt was £20. Yesterday, the world also ordered 30 bullets, and bullets could not be returned. It added up to exactly £100. Odysseus sighed inwardly. The rental business was quite good. Then Odysseus was a little surprised. "I remember Klein has the air bullet ability, why would he still need the flamebolt?" But he also thought that even if Klein had the air bullet ability, he still bought enchanted bullets. The power of the flamebolt is far inferior to enchanted bullets, and has no Beander effects. It can deal with low sequence Beanders, but if it is used against a sequence 7, it can only achieve a surprise effect. Don't expect it to cause much damage. But this weapon is very suitable for sneak attacks or close quarters combat, which is very consistent with Klein's tactics. He pondered for a moment, then used prayer to inform the fool who does not belong to this era, "Please tell Mr. World that a transaction can be made. 1 flamebolt for £500. It needs to be maintained once a year and can be used for 5 or 6 years. Each maintenance costs £100. If not maintained, it can only be used for about 1 year. But it will take more than 10 days to deliver. Additionally, you can choose to order bullets from me, still £1 per bullet. I can also provide the method for making bullets, which requires an additional payment of £100. The bullets used by the flamebolt are not enchanted bullets, and do not require engraving or other operations. They can be processed using existing bullets. The only technical steps are to reformulate the gunpowder recipe and the herbal formula for soaking the bullet heads. However, these two formulas are relatively simple. If the price is too high, Odysseus estimates that Klein would choose to try to divine the formula himself, so it's better to sell it cheaply. Furthermore, in Odysseus's opinion, the weapons manufactured from his research results are not unsellable, but Odysseus is not at ease selling them to ordinary beyonders. He is at ease selling them to Klein. After all, the other party cannot possibly die inexplicably in some corner of the city like those wild beyonders, and the weapons on him would be confiscated by others, completely out of Odysseus's sight. Soon, Odysseus received a reply from the world, "I'll consider it." Odysseus smiled, believing that Klein felt the need for maintenance was a bit troublesome, which was why he was considering it. He had also thought about solving the maintenance problem, but he had researched for a while and had not found a reasonable solution. Theoretically, it's not strictly necessary to disassemble it for maintenance. A mid-sequence beyander continuously replenishing the flamebolt with spirituality could restore the array's function. But the problem is that it's impossible to control the amount of spirituality to replenish. Those arrays are very much like precision instruments. A little too much or too little spirituality won't work. In fact, spiritual materials can maintain their efficacy for 1 to 2 years in a box that prevents spirituality from overflowing. But if there is no arrangement to prevent overflow, and if it is in use, the overflow of spirituality is also very fast. Therefore, after Odysseus manufactured beyander weapons and completed maintenance, he would use a ritual to pray to the god of steam and machinery to suppress the overflow of spirituality. As an informant for the Church of Steam and Machinery, Odysseus's prayers usually received a response from the deity. Even if they didn't, performing the ritual again would basically elicit a response. After an artisan created a beyander weapon, he would also have this step of praying to the deity to ensure the beyander weapon's validity period. When Odysseus's research yielded no results, and he felt that a 1-year usage period for most of the time was acceptable, he finally stopped this line of research. Selling beyander weapons was not Odysseus's main source of income, so after the world said he would consider it, Odysseus did not continue to pay attention to the matter. After lunch, Odysseus took a public carriage to the Backland Fighting Club located in the Hilton district. With Max's letter of recommendation, Odysseus successfully met Federer, the head coach of the fighting club. This head coach, who looked about 1.9 meters tall but was somewhat thin and not very strong, personally introduced Odysseus to 2 ways of joining the club. The first way is to directly pay a £20 annual fee and become a member of the club. You can freely use the club's facilities, find suitable sparring partners, and communicate with other members. The second way is to pay a £10 tuition fee and temporarily join the club as a student. After completing a series of lessons, you will no longer be eligible to enter the club. Odysseus thought to himself, obviously, the first way to join is for people like me who have a foundation in fighting and want to communicate and practice. He said, I choose the first way to join. Federer nodded without surprise. Mr. Max roughly explained your situation in his letter. You've received rigorous combat training, but you lack practical experience, right? Yes. Please go pay the membership fee first, and I'll find a sparring partner for you. Guided by a waiter, Odysseus paid the membership fee, received the club's badge, and entered the indoor arena. The sparring partner Federer found was already waiting at the door. As he invited Odysseus to the practice area, he asked, what intensity of practice do you need? I'm not too sure, Odysseus scratched his head. This is my first time at a fighting club. The sparring partner was slightly taken aback. I understand. I'll be careful. Upon reaching the practice area, the sparring partner said, let's begin. In a blur, he found himself flying backward. Chapter 28, Fighting Practice. The sparring partner Federer found for Odysseus was experienced and highly skilled in combat, usually sparring with the club's senior members. When he communicated with Odysseus just now, he was also a little surprised, not expecting Federer to have him spar with a novice. But when the sparring partner shouted, begin, Odysseus stepped forward abruptly while extending his right hand, and his open palm struck the sparring partner's chest, sending him flying. The sparring partner clutched his chest and got up. If that had been a punch, he would definitely have been injured. Odysseus quickly went to help him. Are you all right? It was his first time using combat techniques against someone else, and he hadn't known his own strength, not expecting to push someone away so easily. I'm fine, I'm fine. The sparring partner felt a bit embarrassed. I wasn't ready just now, wasn't ready, let's go again. He must have been careless just now. The two stood opposite each other again, each assuming their ready stances. The sparring partner saw that Odysseus's ready stance was a bit strange, his body slightly bent, with both fists forward, one in front of the other. This stance was a bit odd, and the sparring partner asked, "Which school of thought is that ready stance from?" Odysseus paused slightly before saying, "Emperor Russell's school." This was actually the starting stance of 8 extremities fist in his memory. After becoming a melee scholar, Odysseus, who had only watched movies and related videos about 8 extremities fist, found that he was also very proficient in this boxing style. But this was, after all, the world of mysticism, and no one would know what 8 extremities fist was, so he directly used Russell as a shield. The sparring partner was slightly taken aback. Emperor Russell also knows combat. However, he didn't delve deeper, but instead took a deep breath, prepared himself, begin. This time, the sparring partner attacked first, sweeping his leg horizontally, attacking Odysseus's seemingly unstable legs. Odysseus merely squatted slightly, his entire body bent like a cooked shrimp, first blocking the sparring partner's attack with both arms, then suddenly exerting force with his whole body, using his shoulder to send the sparring partner flying. Odysseus held back, using his entire shoulder to push, rather than the hard acromion. If he had used the acromion, it could easily injure the sparring partner's internal organs. The sparring partner's face was full of surprise in midair. This blow had pushed him out of the elastic training area, and he would probably land on his backside. But just as he was about to land, he was suddenly pushed by a force, and he stood steadily. The sparring partner looked back, Mr. Frederick. He didn't know when the tall, thin Frederick had already stood behind him. "You go rest for a bit, I'll train with him." The sparring partner paused slightly, then retreated to the side step by step. Odysseus looked at Frederick opposite him and smiled. "Sorry, I seem to have failed to control my strength." "I know," Frederick assumed a ready stance. "I can tell you didn't mean to hurt anyone." "Come on, ready, begin." Frederick suddenly threw a right punch. Odysseus again ducked, avoiding Frederick's attack. At this moment, because Frederick had punched, he had raised his right arm, and his entire right armpit was completely exposed to Odysseus. Before the opponent's left fist came, Odysseus suddenly struck. But what Odysseus didn't expect was that Frederick's right leg kicked out at this moment, which could kick Odysseus in the chest first. Odysseus immediately crossed his hands, blocking in front of him. Thud! This kick landed on Odysseus's arms. Odysseus, following the immense force of Frederick's kick, lifted his feet off the ground, as if he had been kicked flying, but quickly and lightly landed back on the ground. All of this happened very quickly. In the blink of an eye, their exchange was over. Only then did Odysseus have time to think. The opening created by Frederick's punch just now was a trap. Frederick then said, "I understand what kind of practice you need. Today I'll teach you the first point. Your eyes must be faster than your fists." Then he attacked again, just like before. Although Odysseus defended against Frederick's attack, he had no chance to counterattack at all. Soon, their practice gradually caught the attention of the surrounding club members, who came forward to watch. Although Odysseus was always at a disadvantage, their exchange was still very exciting, showcasing combat skills to the extreme. After about an hour of this practice, Frederick suddenly stopped. "That's enough for today." "Thank you," Odysseus said sincerely. He did not leave the fighting club immediately, but instead began to review each of their previous exchanges. He would immediately practice and experience any insights he gained. After his advancement, Odysseus's memory was extraordinary. He could basically remember every exchange just now, so an hour of practice was reviewed by him for more than 3 hours. During the review process, Odysseus suspected that Frederick was also a Beander skilled in combat. There was nothing wrong with any of the content at first glance. Just now, during his practice with the sparring partner, Odysseus could already feel that even if he had never been exposed to combat before, with the help of the potion, his combat skills were already far beyond ordinary people. Only a Beander could possibly be his opponent. It was already evening when he left the club. A thick fog had covered the streets and alleys, and only the flickering gas lamps in the distance could be seen. Arriving at the public carriage station on the street, Odysseus waited for a carriage with some people who were off work. He glanced at the club again, and a somewhat disheveled middle-aged man in his 40s caught his eye. Odysseus had noticed since earlier that this middle-aged man had been observing him. After sensing Odysseus's gaze, the middle-aged man smiled generously, then his gaze turned towards the club. Odysseus didn't feel any sense of danger, so he didn't pay too much attention. At this moment, a newsboy passed by, hawking evening newspapers at the station. "New news in the Loan Evening News. Mrs. Mary, the wealthy lady of the anthracite factory, has received threats from an unknown source. Loan Kingdom and Fasak Empire warships had a brief standoff south of Sonia Island. And the Daily Observer's report on the current situation in the East District. Odysseus recalled the reporter named Mike. He remembered that Klein had once protected this reporter to interview in the East District. One Daily Observer, please. He took out a coin from his pocket, handed it to the newsboy, and received a newspaper in return. On the front page of the Daily Observer, there was indeed a detailed report about the East District. After reading for a while, the carriage arrived. Odysseus sat on the carriage and continued reading. At this point, he saw a report about Ms. Mandy, recruiting new people, in the East District. Although it didn't specify that it was Ms. Mandy, Odysseus knew that the report was referring to her. He believed that many people who had been to the Nanmu ballroom would know that this was about Ms. Mandy. Odysseus couldn't help but frown. After all, that was a gray industry, not something that could see the light of day. It was necessary to talk to that reporter. Chapter 29, The Reporter Who Came to Ask for Help. Additional chapter for everyone's monthly votes. Sitting in the public carriage, Odysseus had another thought. He estimated that Ms. Mandy had already made appropriate arrangements. However, to be safe, he still needed to visit the Nanmu ballroom tomorrow. 15 Minsk Street. Ding a ling. Klein, who was about to enjoy dinner, heard the doorbell ring. He smiled helplessly. Now when I hear the doorbell, it's like hearing a cell phone ring before, something to be avoided. Walking quickly to the door, the somewhat anxious Daily Observer reporter, Mike Joseph, was already in his mind. Klein was slightly stunned. It was so late, why was this reporter still looking for him? As soon as the door opened, Mike smiled and said, "Sorry, I hope I haven't disturbed you." "Well, you have," Klein said helplessly. "It's so late, what do you need me for?" "I received a threatening letter," Mike said rather calmly. "It seems I wrote something I shouldn't have." This seasoned reporter had encountered such situations before, so he remained relatively composed. Klein was slightly taken aback. "Come in and talk." After the two entered, Mike sniffed the aroma of food in the living room. "Mr. Moriarty, if you ever don't want to be a detective, you could consider becoming a chef." "In response to your compliment, I should invite you to dinner," Klein said with a smile while making tea. "But I'm sorry, I only made one portion." He handed the teacup to Mike the reporter. "Let's talk about business." Mike took an opened letter from his pocket. "I received this in the afternoon." Klein opened it and quickly scanned it. The letter's general content pointed out inappropriate parts in today's Daily Observer and invited Mike to meet at the Nanmu ballroom tomorrow to talk. It was different from the threatening letters he remembered. The wording was very polite. If he didn't know it was sent by Ms. Mandy, it truly seemed like an invitation for Mike to go dancing and perhaps spend some money. Klein asked, "What do you plan to do?" "I definitely have to go," Mike said seasoned ly. "It would be more troublesome if I didn't. But if I go alone, it might be a bit dangerous, so I've already applied to the editor-in-chief for £10 in commission, hoping to hire you to protect me." Just like last time, even if there's no conflict, you'll still get this commission. If a conflict occurs, I will add to the commission based on your contribution. Last time he went to the East District, he only got £10 commission for the whole day. Finally, Mike judged, "I'm quite familiar with these kinds of talks. As long as I promise not to write about Ms. Mandy again, I don't think a conflict is likely to happen." As Klein listened, he casually played with a coin. When Mike finished speaking, he suddenly flipped the coin up and caught it. After glancing at the coin's face, Klein smiled and said, "I'll take this commission." Mike breathed a sigh of relief. "Good, then we'll leave at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." Klein nodded. "I won't keep you for dinner." After seeing Mike off, Klein quickly walked to the dining room, praying to the goddess in his heart that his dinner hadn't gotten too cold. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Klein, who had already eaten breakfast, rode a carriage with Mike to the Nanmu ballroom on Enster Avenue in the North District. Getting out of the carriage, Klein was slightly surprised. He had previously thought that the Nanmu ballroom would be similar to other ballrooms, with a somewhat dim and vulgar decor, and street girls displayed like merchandise outside. But what he hadn't expected was that the Nanmu ballroom felt completely different. First, it was a 4-story building, and the main entrance was 2 to 3 times larger than that of ordinary ballrooms. To the left of the entrance was a huge hand-painted sign. The sign, made with an unknown dye, remained vibrant in color even outdoors. Besides the name, Nanmu Ballroom, it also depicted a young woman in a black gown, striking a pose inviting one to dance. This woman's image was not seductive but very elegant, with a natural and poised gaze and movements clearly distinct from ordinary street girls. However, the perfectly exposed black stockings still sparked a lot of imagination. Klein suddenly had a very strange feeling. It wasn't until he entered that he understood where that strange feeling came from. Even in Backland, this was a very rare and clever way of promotion. 51 Henry Street. Odysseus arrived at the herb store early and restocked the herbs on the shelves. After Cain arrived, Odysseus gave a few instructions, then went to the basement in the backyard. This small courtyard had a basement, but it was sealed off by Odysseus, and only he could enter it. Every single piece of content is included. The basement door was in Odysseus's room, and opening it revealed a downward staircase. Odysseus extended his hand and injected his spirituality into the correct position, disarming all the Beander traps set in this downward corridor. Down the stairs was a room the size of a living room. This room was very spacious, with only a coat rack and a set of table and chairs. On the coat rack were a black trench coat and a black top hat, while on the table were black trousers and a silver mask. On the floor next to the table were a pair of black leather shoes. On two walls of this basement, there were two teleportation arrays that Odysseus had spent nearly £9,000 in total to build. Like the array at 77 Hilton Avenue, it also used the 8-pointed star formation, with a priceless Ahana crystal in the center and various colored gemstones used for some key nodes. Because the amount was so large, he had only been reimbursed for half of the expenses by the Church of Steam and Machinery, and there was still a long way to go before full reimbursement. One of the teleportation arrays led to a room in the Nanmu ballroom, while the other led to Odysseus's laboratory in the suburbs. That laboratory in the suburbs was his primary laboratory. Odysseus changed his clothes, put on his mask, and injected his spirituality into the teleportation array leading to the Nanmu ballroom. A illusory passage appeared before him. He stepped in, and 2 or 3 seconds later, he appeared in a room on the 3rd floor of the Nanmu ballroom. He opened the door on the 3rd floor, which faced the 3rd floor reception desk. The female receptionist was slightly surprised and immediately showed a smile. "Mr. Gale, you've arrived." As she spoke, she rang the bell that connected to Ms. Mandy's office. Odysseus, with most of his face hidden behind the mask, nodded slightly. After a short wait, the elegant Ms. Mandy quickly walked over. "Mr. Gale." Odysseus said, "I saw yesterday's report." Ms. Mandy was somewhat flustered. "It was my oversight. I've already arranged to meet that reporter Mike. He and the bodyguard he hired have already arrived." Odysseus nodded. "You talk your business, I'll just sit and listen. Thank you all for your monthly votes. Currently, the monthly votes have exceeded 150, so I'm adding an extra chapter for that. Although this is not a remarkable achievement, it is, after all, a new book, and in author Jun's opinion, having this many monthly votes is quite good. By the way, here are the current standards for extra chapters. An extra chapter will be added for every 150 monthly votes, 1,000 recommendation votes, and a cumulative reward of 10,000 points. This standard might seem a bit slow now, but it's usually easy to achieve after the book goes on sale. At that time, the standard might even need to be raised ******. Finally, thank you again for your support and votes. Chapter 30 They Can't Hear. Klein and Mike were first led by a waiter to a reception room on the 1st floor. After sitting for a few minutes, another waiter invited them to the 3rd floor. On the way to the stairs, Klein saw the huge ballroom on the 1st floor. The ceiling of the 1st floor had been opened up, and a magnificent and huge chandelier hung down from the top of the 2nd floor. This structure made the ballroom look large and tall, and the murals and decorations even gave it a sense of art. Klein sighed. Although it wasn't as luxurious as a noble ballroom, it still gave a feeling of high class. This should be the favorite of the middle class. Spending money in such a place would make them feel respectable. Even when patronizing streetwalkers, they hoped to go to more respectable places. At this time, the ballroom was very quiet, with only a few waiters cleaning. In the sofa area of the ballroom, 2 or 3 ladies were chatting and laughing. After Klein and Mike appeared, they all smiled at the 2 gentlemen. Klein suddenly felt a sensation similar to when girls looked at him when he was in school. Mike also sighed. The feeling here is indeed different. Klein also nodded along. Following the waiter all the way to the 3rd floor, the decor here was even more magnificent. There were areas for entertainment like squash and billiards, as well as dining areas, cafes, and so on. Of course, there were also many warmly decorated rooms here. The 2 were led to a small reception room where Mandy was already waiting. She rose from the sofa and said sternly, "Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to meet you." Besides Mandy, Enoch was also present, but he did not get up, instead staring sullenly at the 2 guests. He was here today to intimidate, so he didn't need to say anything. As soon as Klein entered, he looked at the inner wall. He felt a gaze from inside watching him and Mike. Mike also said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Mandy." Mandy gestured for them to sit down. After everyone was seated, Mandy asked Mike, "Have you ever known about Nanmu Ballroom before?" Mike answered truthfully, "Not very well." Mandy said seriously, "Then why did you write some reports that could easily cause misunderstanding?" Mike was calm at first, but when Mandy asked him that, he suddenly became restless. I was just reporting the truth. There was no slander at all." Klein sighed inwardly, unknowingly, the initiative of this conversation had already fallen into Ms. Mandy's hands. This was not some Beander method, just ordinary rhetoric. But the cold stare of the fierce man beside him, and Ms. Mandy's powerful aura, affected even the experienced Mike, who was influenced by the atmosphere in the room. Watching Mike begin to explain, seeing him become increasingly flustered, Klein cleared his throat and said, "Since Mr. Gale is also here, why doesn't he come out and talk to us himself?" Mandy was slightly startled, her conversational strategy instantly interrupted. Just as she was about to deny it, the inner wall slowly opened, and Odysseus stepped out from the secret door. "Originally, I didn't need to personally talk to this reporter Mike, but you are different." Klein was slightly startled, realizing that Mr. Gale had already discovered that he was a Beander, hence the different treatment. Immediately after, he felt that this, Mr. Gale, gave him a very familiar feeling. But because the other party was wearing a mask that only showed his mouth and chin, he didn't know where he had seen him before, and could only wait for an opportune moment to perform a divination. At this moment, the four people in the room all stood up. Odysseus came and sat opposite reporter Mike, while Mandy and Enoch quickly stood behind him. Odysseus opened the cigar box on the coffee table, picked up 2 cigars, and tossed them casually. "Have a cigar." Odysseus's melee scholar ability allowed him to precisely control his strength. One cigar landed steadily in reporter Mike's hand, even between his index and middle fingers. The other cigar, however, just as it was about to enter Klein's hand, was gently flicked by him with the magician's clever technique. The cigar flew back towards the cigar box. "Sorry, I don't smoke cigars." Odysseus seemingly waved his hand casually, flicking the cigar back towards Klein. "Have one." Klein was about to flick the incoming cigar away again, but who knew that this time the cigar seemed to have a life of its own. Just as it was about to touch Klein's hand, it suddenly turned, not touching his outstretched hand, but instead falling perfectly into his palm. This contest happened very quickly, and by the time Mike and the others reacted, it was already over. Odysseus had been hiding in the secret room earlier. When he noticed Klein looking at him multiple times, he knew that Klein must have sensed his presence. After all, a seer is also a Beander with high spirituality. No mistake, one shot, one send, one inside, one content, all in one glance. If it were Odysseus, the apothecary, it wouldn't matter if he was discovered. But now Odysseus was Mr. Gale, who had Grey Industries. Even if he was discovered, it would be reasonable for him to come out openly and give the other party a warning. Klein felt the immense pressure exerted by Mr. Gale, and understood his intention to intimidate him. He certainly wouldn't confront the other party head-on their territory, so he put away the cigar. "I'll take it back to smoke." It was then that he suddenly thought, our exchange just now felt a bit like a martial arts film's master duel. Hey, Mr. Gale must be a Beander skilled in close combat. After giving the bodyguard a warning and making Mike feel immense pressure, Odysseus lit his cigar and said to Mike, "Mr. Reporter, I've read some of your reports, they are very insightful. But I really want to ask you a question. Your reports have garnered some attention, but have they solved any practical problems? For example, the poverty in the East District, or the economic policies that are increasingly unfriendly to the middle class." After Odysseus cut the cigar, Enoch immediately bent down and slowly lit it for him with a lighter. As an apothecary, Odysseus always smoked his own roasted tobacco mixed with some herbs, and as the leader of the Mysticism Research Society, he always smoked cigarettes. As Mr. Gale, he smoked cigars. Different clothes had already been imbued with different tobacco scents, which was just one of the details. Of course, the main reason was that Odysseus gave these 3 characters different temperaments. So, Odysseus the apothecary, Mr. Gale, and the leader appeared to be 3 different people. Under the pressure of Mr. Gale's aura, Mike answered honestly, "Some problems have been solved, but most have not." Odysseus took a puff from his cigar and gestured for Mike and Klein to sit down. "Mr. Reporter, I know you are a relatively professional journalist and have done many things to help others. However, you cannot solve problems like the poverty in the East District or the tragic fate of streetwalkers, because the people who pay attention to your reports do not care about the fate of the poor and the streetwalkers." Mike was slightly startled, suddenly feeling as if he had grasped the key to the problem. Chapter 31. When I first came here. This was a simple truth, but Mike, a Daily Observer reporter, had consciously or unconsciously overlooked it before. He didn't want the elite class of this society to be cruel and heartless. He hoped that the elite class, like him, would actively try to solve problems once they were discovered, even if they hadn't been noticed by everyone yet. Odysseus leaned back against the sofa, speaking in a slightly weathered voice. What I'm doing is the same as you, just with a different method. I didn't expect understanding or help from those big figures, because it's impossible for them to understand, and help based solely on sympathy is unreliable, as sympathy can easily disappear the next day. You should have heard that I once tried to open a factory. It wasn't because I was investing, I just hoped to give the streetwalkers another path. After all, who would do this line of work unless absolutely forced? But I failed. Currently, only one Nanmu restaurant is still profitable. Mike quickly said, I've heard of it, you're doing something great. Odysseus raised his hand, interrupting Mike, no need for flattery. I know what I'm doing isn't great. On the contrary, it's quite dirty. He pointed to his mask. Once this mask is on, it can't be taken off. But I don't regret it, because I've genuinely solved some problems. The regrettable thing is, all I've received is cold looks and mockery from high society, and there hasn't been a second Nanmu ballroom to this day. Mike was a little agitated. No, what you're doing is truly great. It has provided security for many streetwalkers and prevented many tragedies. Thank you. Odysseus suddenly stood up. Thank you, Mr. Reporter. Mike also quickly stood up. Odysseus continued, people who are willing to understand the Nanmu ballroom will do so through their own channels, but that channel cannot be newspapers because this method is too easily misunderstood and exploited. He then pointed to his mask again, and I must remind you, beneath this mask are too many secrets of important figures. For your sake, for my sake, and for the Nanmu ballroom, please don't let reports like yesterday's appear again. Mike immediately said, don't worry, at least in the Daily Observer, it won't happen again. Odysseus took another puff from his cigar. Thank you. They chatted for a while longer, then Mike stood up to leave, and Mr. Gale escorted them to the stairwell. Leaving the Nanmu ballroom, Mike said, he is a respectable gentleman. Klein nodded in agreement, and at the same time, he planned to divine where he had seen Mr. Gale before as soon as he returned. On the third floor of the Nanmu ballroom, Odysseus, smoking a cigar, said to Enoch, you can bring people to the ballroom to spend tonight, it's on me. Enoch bowed happily, thank you, Mr. Gale. He was one of the few who knew that Mr. Gale was Odysseus. After Enoch left, the elegant Ms. Mandy said, Mr. Gale, Lord Ashburn just sent an invitation yesterday. Well, this is the second invitation, hoping to invite you to his ball. Odysseus smiled, he's still not giving up, huh? The enormous profits of the Nanmu ballroom made many people covet it and want to possess it. Fortunately, this was a grey industry, and nobles and parliament members disdained to compete for it. Yashiborn was a lord who bought his title, not a powerful noble, so his methods were a bit unsightly. Ignore him. Odysseus took a puff of his cigar and said, just say I don't have time to attend. If he dares to use any insidious means, I'll deal with him. After a few casual remarks, Odysseus decided to go back immediately. He planned to continue practicing combat and quickly master his newly acquired Beander characteristic. Returning to the room with the teleportation array sub-array, Odysseus closed the door, activated the sub-array, and returned to the basement of Gaul Herbal Shop. He changed his clothes again, transforming back into the herb shop owner. Odysseus sat in a chair in the lounge and suddenly smiled. He hadn't expected to meet Detective Sherlock today, and he wondered if this great detective had realized that he was the hermit. Or if he had noticed that the Nanmu ballroom's business model seemed familiar. Odysseus pondered Klein's thoughts while taking out his pipe and filling it with tobacco. After lighting his pipe, he recalled the process of establishing the Nanmu ballroom. Every single detail was perfectly in place. When Odysseus transmigrated, he experienced a bizarre Beander event. That Beander event occurred in the northern suburbs of Backland. The original owner of Odysseus's body was the youngest son of a small farm owner. Although grain prices had been falling in recent years, the farm had not gone bankrupt, and life was still manageable. The moment Odysseus transmigrated, all living beings on the entire farm, as well as several surrounding farms and workshops, turned into irrational monsters. Only Odysseus was unaffected and became a mystery prior. There were many small workshops producing industrial products in the area, so most of the residents were followers of the god of steam and machinery. The machinery hivemind immediately intervened and launched an investigation after receiving the report. The machinery hivemind perceived that this case seemed to be related to some high-level Beander characteristics or sealed artifacts from the mystery prior pathway or the Savon pathway. Even the headquarters of the Church of Steam and Machinery had inquired about the matter multiple times. Therefore, they interrogated Odysseus for a full half-month. But fortunately, their spirituality only sensed a connection at this level. If they had detected a link to the knowledge wilderness, the god of steam and machinery might have personally come to talk to Odysseus. The machinery hivemind investigated for over half a month but found no clues. In the end, they had no choice but to bring Odysseus, who had become a Beander, to Backland and find him a residence near the Backland Mechanical Research Society for continued observation. However, Odysseus, by entering the knowledge wilderness, had already understood the reason for that Beander event. When he came to this world, he possessed much knowledge about the Old Ones and the cosmos, which brought immense disaster to the surrounding space. As for why this disaster didn't affect all of Backland, and why he himself was not only unaffected but also became a Beander, Odysseus believed it should be related to the knowledge wilderness. He wasn't entirely clear on the specific reason, but it was the most reasonable conjecture. At the same time, while Odysseus was using the knowledge wilderness to study his own experience, he unexpectedly discovered some laws and new uses for spirituality and arrays. This led him to research a method for large-scale, rapid cultivation of spiritual herbs. So, while cooperating with the machinery hivemind's investigation, he studied mysticism knowledge under their close supervision, pretending to have had an epiphany, and then began contracting mountain wildernesses to cultivate spiritual herbs. Initially, he only sold them at some mysticism gatherings. Later, he received an order to supply spiritual materials to the machinery hivemind, which then gave him enough money to open an herb shop. As a physically healthy young man, when Odysseus gradually became wealthy, he naturally patronized the many streetwalkers. But very quickly, Odysseus was disappointed with the prostitution industry in this world. Chapter 32, The Divination for Mr. Gal failed. Before transmigrating, Odysseus had certain moral self-expectations, but after transmigrating, his mindset changed. He felt like he had a second chance at life, so of course, he wanted to experience a different kind of life. At the same time, there were so many streetwalkers, both overt and covert, on the streets. It would have been strange if Odysseus, having a little money, hadn't given it some thought. However, Odysseus soon discovered that the sex industry in this world was far too crude. He had seen some movies about pure courtesans, and heard stories about Yangzhou thin horses, and certain human realms. He knew that if this industry was to be even slightly upscale, it should appear more decent and cultured. At the very least, there should be artistic performances and a chance to chat with the young ladies, right? Later, as he gained a deeper understanding of the industry, Odysseus felt the malice of this city. The lives of many streetwalkers were extremely tragic, especially those who contracted diseases and passed away in the prime of their lives. Odysseus had also considered some solutions, such as using the Church of Steam and Machinery's channels to introduce female workers to factories. However, he found that many female workers returned to being streetwalkers after a period of time. Upon inquiring, Odysseus learned that most of them were unemployed because more advanced machinery entered factories, leading to layoffs, while some were unemployed due to factory closures or intentional dismissals by managers. It was then that Odysseus began to seriously consider this issue. He realized that this era offered few choices to ordinary people, especially those from poor families. Although society was developing and even creating many new professions, people from poor families lacked sufficient knowledge to board this fast-developing train and share in the dividends of the era. Ultimately, they still lived in poverty, even tragically, throughout their lives. Odysseus finally deeply felt what was called the sorrow of the times. At the same time, he realized that with his identity and abilities, it would be difficult to help these women through legal and compliant means. Thus, he came up with the idea of transforming the Backland streetwalker industry. While he was making his plan, he rescued Mandy, who was about to be sold to a black ballroom due to debt problems, and began to train her to become his assistant. After developing a detailed plan, he used the power of mysticism to subdue the gang led by Enoch, advancing his plan step by step, and finally used all his savings and all the money he could borrow to open the Nanmu ballroom. After the ballroom opened, Odysseus found that these streetwalkers' demands were not high, they just wanted a stable, protected place to do business. But without Odysseus's efforts, they wouldn't even be able to satisfy this small demand. Odysseus then spent more than half a year cultivating a group of streetwalkers who possessed a certain level of literary and artistic accomplishment, could play at least one musical instrument, and knew various social dances, all according to the requirements of pure courtesans. At this level, they truly could no longer be called streetwalkers, but rather, using the low-end term, courtesans. It was also from that time that Odysseus began to build his intelligence network. Because such business was very novel, it attracted a large number of high-ranking nobles, wealthy individuals, and members of parliament, and even several princes secretly visited. This was equivalent to planting many of his own eyes and ears within Bakland's upper society. Previously, Odysseus had used this intelligence network to confirm that the noble scions who had recently visited the Russell Memorial Exhibition alone had not shown any abnormalities. At the same time, Odysseus cleverly used the power of certain important figures to allow the Nanmu Ballroom, a gray industry, to exist legitimately. The tobacco in the pipe burned out. Odysseus cleared his throat, his reflections on the past ending there. He looked out the window and began to ponder the new knowledge he had gained after his advancement. 15 Minsk Street, Cherwood Borough. Klein returned by the carriage hired by the reporter Mike. As soon as he entered, he casually took out a coin and silently chanted in his heart, "I have met Mr. Gale before. I have met Mr. Gale before." While chanting, he flipped the coin, it was heads. He had indeed met him before. Klein closed the door and quickly went to the sofa, then began to use dream divination, the scene of my meeting with Mr. Gale. The scene of my meeting with Mr. Gale. After chanting 7 times, he sat on the sofa and fell asleep through meditation. Between sleep and wakefulness, a small reception room appeared before Klein's eyes, along with high-end sofas and a coffee table, and a cigar box on the coffee table. This was the scene of their recent meeting. Soon, this familiar scene was covered by a layer of rolling gray fog, and his vision was also obstructed by the rolling gray fog. Klein instantly woke up from the dream. He frowned. The divination failed. Is it because of insufficient information? Or was it blocked by some high-level sealed artifact? Every word, every sentence, every detail, all in one glance. Ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling. The doorbell interrupted Klein's thoughts. He returned to the door. It was Mrs. Steline Sommer's maid, inviting Klein to a party. Only then did Klein remember that he had previously promised Mrs. Sommer to attend the matchmaking party she was hosting at her home today. As for Mr. Gale's problem, he could consider it when he had time, or simply let it go. After all, they were not on the same path, and there was no need to divine on the gray fog. After 1 p.m., Odysseus took a carriage and arrived again at the Bakland Fighting Club, in Hilton District. Head coach Federer still accompanied Odysseus for practice. After reviewing and contemplating last night, Odysseus used Tai Chi to deal with Federer today. Odysseus had learned Tai Chi in his university physical education class, and his understanding of this martial art was deeper than that of 8 extremities fist. Wild horse parts its mane, white crane spreads its wings. Each move he executed left the surrounding club members who were practicing stunned. Federer also muttered to himself, has he learned another new fighting style? This style is very skillful in deflecting and exerting force. Why haven't I seen it before? It's just that the stance is a bit strange. However, Odysseus has not yet fully mastered the fighting techniques of this style, otherwise it would be very difficult to deal with him. Even so, Odysseus occasionally had opportunities to counterattack today. After practicing for more than an hour, Federer nodded with satisfaction. Very good, it's clear that you've done a lot of thinking. Odysseus thanked Federer and, just like yesterday, began to review and contemplate. This made Federer, who was instructing other members and occasionally glancing over, sigh with emotion. Perhaps, in another week, I won't be able to guide him anymore. When he left the club, it was already evening. Odysseus was not affected by the gray fog outside at all. He smiled with satisfaction, he had gained a lot this afternoon. As he walked towards the public carriage station, he saw the same middle-aged man from yesterday, who was in his 40s and a bit disheveled. This time, the middle-aged man approached with a smile. Friend, want to make money? Odysseus scrutinized the other party. Yes, why? Do you have some illegal way to make money? He thought to himself, could it be that he's met someone looking for a surrogate mother with a large sum of money? Chapter 33 Underground Fighting Arena. Odysseus was first stunned by the middle-aged man's rhetorical question, then he smiled and said, as long as you don't call the police, it's not illegal. Fight a match, win £5, and even if you lose, you get £3, how about it? Isn't that very profitable? Only then did Odysseus understand that it was about fighting in underground boxing, or to put it nicely, no rules fighting. It sounded very profitable. Most middle-class people in Bakland had a weekly wage between £3 and £8. To be precise, earning over £6 already meant being a relatively affluent middle-class individual. But often, the injuries sustained from a single match could not heal in just 1 week. Immediately after, Odysseus considered another matter. He was worried about not having any real combat opportunities, so he could go to the underground fighting arena and hone his fighting skills through no-rules real combat. Seeing Odysseus remain silent, the middle-aged man thought he was dissatisfied with the remuneration. How about £6 if you win, and £4 if you lose? He smiled and said, I can't give you any more than that. After all, you haven't fought in a match before, and I don't know your skill level. This is already the highest price I can offer you. Odysseus came back to his senses and asked, if I can win 2 consecutive matches, how much can I earn from the second match? The young man is very confident, isn't he? The middle-aged man smiled and said, the second match is £12. But I must remind you, the people who fight in the fighting arena are all quite skilled. Odysseus, however, said to himself, so, if I win 3 consecutive matches, the third match alone can earn me £24. In that case, a total of £48 could be obtained from 3 matches. That's quite a profit. He grinned and smiled. Why hadn't he thought of this money-making avenue before? The middle-aged man saw Odysseus's smile gradually become a little unsettling. He cleared his throat and said, if you win 3 consecutive matches, the third match can get you £50, but very few people can achieve 3 consecutive wins, so you shouldn't think that way. Odysseus, however, seemed not to hear the middle-aged man's words. In that case, I can earn a total of £74. Not bad. The middle-aged man was a bit helpless. Forget it, think whatever you want to think. Odysseus said, I'll go with you. I want to fight in a match. He felt he couldn't wait any longer. All right. The middle-aged man put his fingers to his mouth and blew a loud whistle. Soon, a small carriage drove over. After getting into the carriage, the middle-aged man introduced himself. His name was Gurs, and he was the manager of an underground fighting arena. Every day, he would scout for new talent in places like fighting clubs. Odysseus nodded, and it could also be understood this way. Those who fought in underground boxing were consumed more quickly. The carriage arrived at the south of the bridge. In a not very spacious alley, there was a dilapidated bar. Gurs led Odysseus through the door, and immediately, some patrons greeted him. Gurs brought another fledgling back. This is no fledgling, Gurs said sternly, this gentleman is a senior member of the Backland Fighting Club. This explanation, instead, drew a burst of laughter. A red-nosed patron laughed. Last time, that big guy you hyped up so much, his nose was broken just 1 minute into the match. Ha 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 ha. The laughter grew louder. Gurs impatiently waved his hand. Gentlemen, get ready to place your bets. As he spoke, he led Odysseus to the bar counter. The bartender immediately opened the bar's partition and then knocked on the door behind it. The door opened from the inside, revealing a downward staircase with a guard inside. Go, fledgling, try to last a minute. Ha 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 ha. The shouts of, go, and loud laughter from behind seemed to want to tear the roof off. After the door closed, Odysseus stopped on the stairs and asked, can I place a bet? Gurs was first stunned, then he smiled and said, of course you can. Odysseus took out his wallet from his pocket. Let me see, I still have £66, 12 solar, and 5 pence here. I'll bet it all on myself winning 3 consecutive matches. Gurs looked at the stack of money, somewhat stunned. You're very wealthy. Odysseus was also slightly taken aback. He scrutinized his attire. Do I look like I'm very poor? I mean, you don't wear a tailcoat or formal attire like a gentleman, and you always take public carriages, so. That's why Gurs had approached him. If he had known this guy could pull out over £60 in one go, he would never have asked. If he was that rich, he would only participate in no-rules fighting if he were sick. Odysseus said somewhat helplessly, wearing formal attire is very uncomfortable. But gentlemen all dress that way. Odysseus spread his hands. I've never wanted to be some damn gentleman. He didn't continue the topic but handed the money to Gurs. Remember to give me the receipt. All right. Gurs quickly took the money. Of course, he wouldn't refuse business that came to him. At the same time, he planned to spend £1 himself to bet on Odysseus winning the first match. If he won, the odds would surely be very high, and if he lost, it would only be a loss of £1. Descending the stairs led to a spacious underground area, 2 or 3 times larger than the bar above, and it also had 2 other entrances. The only drawback was that the air quality wasn't very good. In the center of the venue was a large wooden circular fence, and on the fence, as well as on the ground inside, some already dried bloodstains could still be seen. Additionally, this was also the bar's warehouse, piled with some wooden barrels and 2 simple but sturdy wine racks. The betting area was a small, dilapidated desk, behind which sat a burly man in his 30s with a fierce expression and teeth stained yellow from cigarettes. Hearing Gurza's conversation with the other party, Odysseus knew that this was Simon, the owner of this underground fighting arena. After Simon learned that Odysseus had bet over 60 pounds on himself, he looked at the somewhat slender young man in front of him with a somewhat fierce gaze. "You have guts." Odysseus smiled slightly and asked the manager Gurs, "Please prepare dinner for me." Preferably not too greasy." Gurs first sought Simon's approval with his eyes before nodding, "All right." Simon reminded him with an ill-intentioned smile, "You'd better eat less, otherwise, if you throw up later from being beaten, it will be very uncomfortable." The few thugs behind him laughed without restraint. "Thanks for the reminder." Odysseus didn't say much more, found a stool, and sat down. About 10 minutes later, Gurs brought him his dinner. Pork stew with tender peas, a large piece of bread, and a cup of cheap tea. The taste was average, but Odysseus wasn't picky. He watched the gamblers continuously arriving to place their bets while finishing all his food. By around 8 p.m., over 200 gamblers had gathered here, and the first match was about to begin. Chapter 34 3 Consecutive Victories. Since Odysseus was new, Gurs arranged for him to fight the first match. His opponent was a big guy about 1.9 meters tall, looking at Odysseus with a relaxed expression. "Timothy, you got a great deal." Timothy was the name of Odysseus's opponent. "There's nothing good to see in the first match." Amidst the clamor, the referee outside the fighting arena announced the rules of the match. If one party faints, surrenders, or leaves the fighting arena in any form, the other party wins. "Ready, start." The gamblers shouted for Timothy to quickly dispatch the newcomer in front of him. Timothy took the initiative to attack, swinging a punch forward fiercely. Odysseus deftly dodged, then seized the opportunity to step forward and extend his palm, hitting Timothy's Adam's apple and chin with all his might, sending him flying. Thud! Timothy fell heavily to the ground, unconscious. The surroundings instantly fell silent. Simon, who was watching the match from a high vantage point, took a deep puff of his cigarette and asked the stunned manager, Gurs, beside him, "You said he's from the Backland Fighting Club." Gurs reacted, "Yes, yes. Go inquire again tomorrow." "Yes, yes." In the fighting arena, Odysseus looked at the referee, "Is there a countdown segment?" The referee finally came to his senses, symbolically counted for a few seconds, and then announced Odysseus as the winner. "I can fight another match consecutively," Odysseus said with a smile. Only then did the people around react, and for a moment, there was a buzzing discussion, guessing the newcomer's background. The referee did not respond immediately but went to Simon for instructions before returning and saying, "Yes, the contestant for the second match, Toby. You will be this newcomer's opponent." The people around almost simultaneously let out an "oh" sound, and many had knowing smiles on their faces. A man about Odysseus's height took off his hat, then his trench coat and shirt, and began to warm up outside the fighting arena. Odysseus carefully observed this opponent. He didn't look tall, but his muscles were very firm, and his punching speed was very fast. Judging by the expressions of the people around, Toby must be a master of this underground fighting arena. While Toby was warming up, betting for the second match began. Odysseus sat leisurely on the wooden railing, hearing that roughly half of the people were still betting on Toby to win. After all, Odysseus had won too quickly just now, and not many of them were experts in fighting. They didn't understand the subtlety of Odysseus's strike, nor did they realize that Odysseus's victory wasn't a fluke or good luck. They still placed their bets according to their previous perceptions. Soon, the second match began. Toby stared at Odysseus with full concentration. He knew very well that Odysseus would be difficult to deal with. Odysseus was also more serious than in the previous match, adopting a standard fighting stance. The surroundings once again began to shout chaotically, "Toby, punch his nose into his stomach. Toby, make him kneel and beg for mercy. Toby, I've bet all my belongings on you. Hurry up, you two bastards." The two people in the fighting arena had stared at each other for more than 10 seconds. Finally, Toby couldn't bear it anymore and tentatively threw a punch. Odysseus also made his move at the right time, blocking Toby's attack, then suddenly leaned forward, preparing to push Toby down. Fortunately, Toby's attack was only tentative, and he had enough space to jump away, though the process of jumping away was somewhat clumsy. Seeing the unfavorable situation, the surrounding spectators shouted, "Go, Toby. Don't be like a woman. Toby, what are you doing? Punch, punch." Toby felt he had roughly grasped his opponent's style and began to attack with his legs. In his opinion, his opponent's style was to quickly close in and then attack. As long as he didn't let the opponent get close, he could continue to observe and look for opportunities. After Odysseus dodged several rounds of his opponent's attacks, he seized an opportunity to suddenly step forward, quickly squat down, once again avoiding Toby's kick. Then he suddenly rose forward, actually ramming Toby with his right shoulder, lifting him up and sending him flying. Crash! Toby fell onto a table behind a circle of gamblers, cried out in pain, and then also fainted. The area around the fighting arena fell silent again. This time, however, the referee reacted. Newcomer wins. The newcomer wins again. The surrounding gamblers once again began to buzz with discussion. They simply couldn't understand how the newcomer, who looked relatively thin and whose muscles didn't seem very developed, managed to win 2 consecutive matches. Odysseus held up 3 fingers. I want to fight 10. No, I want to fight the 3rd match. The referee went to Simon for instructions again and quickly returned, saying, the 3rd match will be 3-on-1. Are you sure you want to fight? Odysseus saw Simon, with his fierce expression, showing a cunning smile in the distance. He said indifferently, confirmed. There is not a single mistake in the content. The surroundings fell silent again. This is a madman. A gambler's exclamation made the surrounding murmurs even louder. Some thought the newcomer was too arrogant, while others believed the newcomer must be confident. While the 3 contestants warmed up, betting for the 3rd match began. This time it was roughly 50-50, half of the people were betting on Odysseus to win, and half were betting on him to lose. The 3rd match began. Odysseus was surrounded in the middle, and the 3 opponents immediately launched their offensive. They didn't rush him all at once but strategically had 2 attacking while 1 directed and covered. Odysseus used his agile movements to repeatedly and surprisingly escape their encirclement without incident. After a basic observation of the 3 opponents, Odysseus decided to start his counterattack. Just then, among the surrounding gamblers, he saw a familiar face. It was a thin middle-aged man with a noticeable scar at the corner of his left eye. Odysseus suddenly recalled that Enoch had reported to him on Monday that this was an informant for the mandated punishers, and someone was paying to find his whereabouts. The moment Odysseus was slightly distracted, his opponent seized the opportunity, and one swung a punch with full force, hitting Odysseus's cheek. Amidst the enthusiastic shouts, Odysseus's ears buzzed from the blow, but a Beander's physique is much stronger than that of an ordinary person. He took a step back, shook his head, and the discomfort quickly disappeared. But his opponents seized the opportunity, and the strongest one among them ambushed Odysseus from behind, firmly locking Odysseus's shoulders with his arms. The opponent who had just punched Odysseus lifted his leg and kicked fiercely towards Odysseus's chest and abdomen. Odysseus struggled twice, and seeing that he couldn't break free, he used the big guy behind him as a leverage point, suddenly jumped up, and locked his legs around the oncoming opponent. With a strong twist, the opponent spun and flew away, falling onto the wooden railing and collapsing. As soon as Odysseus's feet touched the ground, he suddenly exerted force again, surprisingly jumping up with the big guy on his back, then flipped over, falling backward with force onto the ground. The fall was very heavy, and the 2 arms that were locking Odysseus immediately released. The big guy was jolted and found it difficult to get up for a moment. Odysseus jumped up, about to attack the 3rd opponent. However, the opponent somewhat panicked and jumped outside the railing, choosing to surrender. The surroundings once again fell silent. Odysseus looked at the referee. Do I still need to fight? The referee quickly said, newcomer wins. Odysseus jumped out of the wooden railing and went to Simon to collect his reward and winnings. Yesterday, my editor talked to me, and it seems the book might be put on shelves soon. This book's performance is much better than the last one, but author Jun estimates it won't make it to recommendations like Sanjong, so it's better to put it on shelves earlier and then start updating more frequently, which might attract more popularity. I'll let everyone know the specific on-shelf date once it's confirmed. Hollow down pointing triangle. Chapter 35 Bernadette's Conjecture. Gers, the manager of the underground fighting arena, sat behind a table counting money, while Simon, with a sinister look, smiled malevolently and said, "Kid, you could have actually earned another 300 solar." He took a hard drag on his cigarette, his yellowed teeth seemingly deepening in color. If you had pretended to win with great difficulty in the first 2 matches, you would definitely have earned a lot more money. In that case, most gamblers would have bet on Odysseus losing all the way, and not only would Odysseus have earned more money, but Simon would have also earned more money. However, Odysseus won too easily in the first 2 matches. If he hadn't placed a bet on his own 3-match winning streak in advance, he wouldn't have earned anything in the 3rd match. Odysseus, sitting opposite Gers, calmly said, "One shouldn't be too greedy." If he had really manipulated the matches that way, he probably wouldn't have been able to get the winnings from Simon so easily as he did now. At this point, Gers finished counting the money. The winnings plus his compensation totaled 332 solar and 6 solar. Only a small portion were 10 solar banknotes, with most being 5 solar and 1 solar banknotes, making for a thick stack. Many gamblers around them, upon seeing the money, couldn't help but swallow, some even showing greedy looks. Since Odysseus had knocked out all the other competitors, today's matches were over, and most gamblers had already left. After Odysseus swept his gaze over them, all traces of greed vanished. Odysseus stood up, about to take the money, but Simon suddenly pressed his hand down on it, interested in a collaboration. I know of a very high-end competition, with many people from high society watching and betting. The compensation for winning a match starts at 150 solar. No interest, Odysseus said. Hearing that reward, he knew it was a competition exclusively for the entertainment of nobles, and he had looked into it before. Simon, however, said, "You can think about it again." He smiled wickedly. "I know some information that ordinary people don't. If I report your situation to the church, he. Odysseus already had a plan in mind, and he calmly said, "Don't force me to hit you. You will agree." Simon wisely withdrew his hand. Odysseus picked up the money and counted it, and after confirming it was correct, he casually grabbed a bottle of wine from a nearby wine rack, pulled out the cork with his teeth, took 2 gulps, and swaggered away. Of course, he had to drink to celebrate. Earning over 300 solar in one night was the annual income for many middle-class people. However, this method of earning money couldn't be replicated. After this night, the gamblers would all know he was a strong fighter, and the odds wouldn't be as high as they were now. He could try to find other underground fighting arenas, but by the time he found them, tonight's feat would probably have spread, and he wouldn't be able to use information asymmetry to win bets anymore. Odysseus still exited through the direction of the bar, drinking as he walked very carefully through the dim alley. Perhaps a few drunken gamblers would team up to rob him. Fortunately, he left the alley without being attacked. Soon, he arrived at a slightly wider street, where carriages occasionally passed by, and many homeless people rested on both sides of the road. Suddenly, Odysseus stopped. He surprisingly saw the mandated punishers, informant among the homeless. To be precise, he saw his corpse. The informant was huddled on the ground, eyes empty, as if he had just died. Odysseus was about to step forward to examine him, but reason stopped him. Just as he was about to quickly leave, a familiar female voice suddenly echoed in his ear. "He died very strangely, his spirit body has been annihilated." The voice belonged to the queen mystic, Bernadette. Odysseus looked around. Apart from a carriage approaching in the distance, the surroundings were filled with homeless people trying to get some sleep, unaware when the police would come to drive them away. Although he didn't see Bernadette, he knew that the queen mystic was already nearby. "Why are you here?" "I was attending a Beander gathering nearby." After the gathering, as Bernadette was leaving, she saw Odysseus wandering around, so she came to take a look, only to find this obviously abnormal murder scene. Odysseus asked, "Who killed this person?" "A sheriff." As soon as Bernadette finished speaking, the mist beside Odysseus suddenly swirled, forming a human figure made of mist. The figure looked about 26 or 27 years old, with a high nose bridge, sinister eyes, and a small black mark on his cheek. Immediately, the somewhat illusory figure vanished. "I've seen his photo," Odysseus said. "He's from the palace guard." Then he asked, "Can you erase the traces of me stopping here?" If all traces of his passing through here were erased, it would be suspicious, so erasing only the traces of his brief stop here would suffice. Yes. Odysseus immediately felt as if he had become light and airy, like a spirit body wandering in the real world. As he quickly left, he said, "As far as I know, the deceased was an informant for the mandated punishers." Why would someone from MI9 kill a mandated punishers informant? "I don't know," Bernadette's ethereal voice said from around him. "But I have a premonition that there's a significant secret hidden within this, and I will quietly conduct some investigations." Odysseus was slightly stunned and reminded her, "This isn't something you should be curious about." "I won't actively investigate," Bernadette said. "I have a premonition that you will also be involved in the investigation in the future." She wasn't in Backland for sightseeing, she had a prophecy that something with profound implications for the entire world might happen in this city, and she was here to seek opportunities for advancement. Just now, she had a premonition that the death of this informant concealed a huge conspiracy. She also had a premonition that she might be implicated in the future, so if there was an opportunity, it would be better to proactively conduct some investigations. "Thank you very much," Odysseus said with a wry smile. "I still want to live a few more years. Getting involved in confidential matters would shorten his lifespan." Bernadette suddenly asked, "With your extensive intelligence network, you must have noticed it too, right?" Something big is brewing in Backland. Odysseus said, I've only noticed that the current situation is a bit chaotic recently, and the conflicts between various parties are becoming increasingly obvious. He, of course, knew that this was a subtle manifestation of George III's impending deification, and he also knew that with his current strength, it was better to pretend not to know. This is just the prelude, Bernadette said with certainty in her tone. Let's talk about something else, Odysseus said. I'm just a low-sequence Beander, this kind of thing is too high level, it's not something I should be worried about. Alright, Bernadette didn't insist. Then let's talk about the 2 bookmarks that went missing from the Kingdom Museum that day. Odysseus thought to himself, or, how about we discuss world peace? Chapter 36 The Mysterious Queen urges the order online. Upon hearing Bernadette's words, Odysseus's internal alarm bells went off. He feigned a relaxed expression and asked, is there something wrong with those 2 bookmarks? You should know that one of those 2 bookmarks isn't an ordinary bookmark, right? Bernadette, still unseen, asked. I don't know, Odysseus replied, and his nose grew longer again. A soft, ha-ha, echoed in the air. Odysseus felt cold sweat almost breaking out. Continuing this conversation could easily drag the fool into it, which would be troublesome. Just then, he suddenly realized, Bernadette was asking about the specific details of the bookmark, not its whereabouts. He quickly recalled their recent conversation about the blasphemy card in his mind and confirmed that Bernadette was indeed not inquiring about the bookmark's location. You scared me to death. Odysseus, who knew too many secrets, breathed a sigh of relief. He had been feeling guilty earlier, which was why his thoughts had drifted to Mr. the Fool. Actually, with the above the gray fog obstructing, Bernadette had no way of knowing the exact location of the blasphemy card through Beander means. He took a deep breath before saying, all right, Machinery Hivemind did indeed discover that one of those 2 types of bookmarks was unusual. It's said that Archbishop Horace Haydn believes the Church of Steam and Machinery has been deceived by Emperor Russell for over 150 years. After stating this genuine intelligence he had gathered, his nose, of course, returned to normal. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. After more than 10 seconds, Odysseus asked, are you still there? I just didn't expect things. Bernadette seemed to compose herself before saying, if you can help me find out what that special bookmark truly is, I will pay you a substantial reward. This is a bit difficult, Odysseus said truthfully. It's hard for me to see Archbishop Haydn, and even if I did, it would be difficult to get useful information from him. However, I will keep an eye out for you. Perhaps others who were present at the time also know the truth. It wasn't that he didn't want to investigate, it was that he couldn't. What if Mr. Fool cast a curse, and he'd have to live in poverty for the rest of his life? Bernadette hummed in acknowledgement. All right, delivering it to you is enough. Go back and quickly make those 10 flamebolts. I heard you haven't even started. Odysseus was taken aback. You sent someone to monitor me. It's not monitoring, it's just occasionally checking on your progress. Odysseus opened his mouth, realizing it might be Bernadette's formless servant, who frequently appeared at the herb shop. If I go to patronize a streetwalker, do you want to know about that too? Haha, what? Is there something to be ashamed of? Bernadette's voice gradually became ethereal. I need to remind you, you need to act quickly. If you can't deliver on time, don't expect me to give you the final payment. She planned to have Elia observe Odysseus's process of making Beander weapons through the formless servant, hoping to learn all of it so that Oravi Island could make flamebolts themselves afterward. At the same time, Bernadette had a premonition that diligently having the servant observe Odysseus's actions would yield unexpected gains. I know, Odysseus said, not in a very good mood. I warn you, don't watch when I'm bathing. Hey, my servant doesn't have such a hobby. Bernadette's voice became increasingly ethereal. As soon as she finished speaking, Odysseus felt the light, floating sensation disappear, and he returned to the real world. He sighed helplessly, feeling that he wouldn't dare take off his clothes even when sleeping from now on. Since the client urged him, the next day, which was Friday morning, Odysseus had Cain place an order at the foundry, custom ordering parts for 15 flamebolts at once. Because he was ordering a large quantity, the cost per set of parts could be reduced to 1 solar. Just as his assistant, Cain, was about to leave, a rented carriage delivered a letter from the Backland Mechanical Research Society. Odysseus opened the envelope, pulled out the letter, and quickly scanned it. It was a report on Zio Durech's investigation. So Odysseus had Cain go to place an advertisement in the newspaper and also send a letter to Huo, preparing for a gathering tomorrow. Actually, when Odysseus was calculating that bill with Bernadette earlier, the spirituality materials he mentioned, although slightly lower than market price, still contained an element of inflated pricing. This was because a portion of those spirituality materials, Odysseus could cultivate and raise himself. After his assistant, Cain, returned from running errands, Odysseus had him mind the shop while he himself went into the basement of the backyard, heading to his laboratory in the suburbs to collect some needed materials. South of the bridge, Tutewa Street, number 22. Knock knock knock. Who is it? Furs, still in bed past 10 o'clock, asked irritably. A letter for Zio Derecha. I know, just put it in the mailbox. Furs opened a magazine and continued to lean against her headboard. She mumbled to herself, it's foggy today, too cold. It's okay to wake up later, it's okay to wake up later. Suddenly, Furs seemed to remember something. She quickly changed her clothes, opened the door, and looked left and right. The fog outside was indeed thick, but she didn't see any suspicious figures on the street. She quickly went to the mailbox and took out a letter signed, Mysticism Research Society, from inside. Sure enough, Furs looked around again but still didn't see any suspicious people. She thought to herself, maybe it's time to move again. An hour later, Huo, who had no tasks that noon, returned. Oh, goddess above, you're actually awake. She said this while going to the fireplace to warm herself. It's been 2 consecutive days without seeing the sun. If the Eternal Blazing Sun Church were to preach in Backland, they would surely gain a large number of followers. Furs, busy in the kitchen, wiped her hands and handed the letter to Huo. A letter from the Mysticism Research Society. Huo was slightly startled and quickly took it. Furs had already opened the envelope beforehand. She pulled out the letter inside, which read, Dear Miss Dilcha, we are pleased to inform you that you have been approved to join the Mysticism Research Society. The time of the gathering will be published in the Backland Post, 3rd page, GG column. Please look for GG regarding the sale of bulk herbs. The 3rd digit appearing in GG+3 is the meeting date. If the result is 32 or 33, then it is the 2nd and 3rd of the following month. The 4th digit +2 is the meeting hour, and the last digit, ignoring any zeros, is the meeting minute. As this is your first time attending, a carriage will pick you up 2 hours before the gathering. Please be sure to wait in advance. Additionally, please prepare 5 solar in cash to cover the cost of the standardized masks and hooded cloaks provided in the carriage. Sincerely, the leader. Huo frowned. What a strange gathering. No Beander gathering would send such a formal notification unless the organizer was crazy. This also proves the information you got before. Furs helped analyze. This, leader, has official backing, so there's nothing to be afraid of. She paused and added, and it's very mysterious, very cool, isn't it? It's probably going to be available next month on the 1st, but it still depends on the specific results, though it's highly likely to be available on that day. Also, the Paris Olympics have started, and author Jun has updated an extra chapter about a Beander sports meeting in his previous book, Mysteries, The New Black Emperor Descends. Those interested can go check it out. Hollow down pointing triangle. Chapter 37 Odysseus's First Pot of Gold. Not far to the west of Backland lies the Balchus Mountains, a north-south mountain range that divides the Backland Plain and the Tuckerville Plain, and serves as the last barrier to the west of Backland. Odysseus's laboratory was built deep within this mountain range. It was over 50 kilometers from Gaul Herbal Shop in the West District, which was the limit of the teleportation array. Although only 50-odd kilometers apart, this area was far enough from the city, and because there wasn't much good farmland, only a few small villages were scattered in the mountains, making it very remote. Many noble estates were chosen in this direction. However, noble estates would not be chosen around Odysseus's laboratory, as this area was full of hills and transportation was very inconvenient. For Odysseus, this was a good, undisturbed place. Odysseus's laboratory looked like an ordinary house, but because it had only one room, it was very spacious. There were 3 test benches, a small metallurgical furnace, and 2-foot pedal engraving machines that Odysseus had built himself, used for engraving mystical symbols on hard objects. In addition, there were 2 tall cabinets, on which various herbs and spirituality materials were placed. There were Beander traps in the yard and on the walls, so Odysseus was not afraid of villagers intruding. Odysseus did not linger in the laboratory. Instead, after temporarily disarming the traps he had set in the yard, he quickly headed into the mountains. There were no residents in the area where he built his laboratory. Continuing deeper into the mountains, he might not encounter a single person even after walking for an entire day. After crossing a mountain peak, signs of human activity such as fences and wooden houses appeared on the mountain before them. A large area around it had been purchased by Odysseus. There were no mineral deposits here, no continuous forests, and it was not suitable for growing crops, so it was very cheap. For Odysseus, this place was very suitable for cultivating herbs and some low-level spirituality plants, and also suitable for raising some not-so-high-level spirituality animals, such as Odysseus's destination today, the mutated flamingos breeding area. Large-scale cultivation of spirituality plants and breeding of spirituality creatures were Odysseus's unique patents. It is said that before this, the Earth Mother Church had conducted many studies on breeding spirituality creatures, but the results were difficult to satisfy. They did manage to raise a batch, but it required continuous help from a demigod. Ultimately, they found it too uneconomical and stopped research in this area. They would never have imagined that a herb shop owner in Backland had successfully realized their vision, cultivating and breeding spirituality materials on a large scale without the help of high-level Beander power. For such a large enterprise, Odysseus also hired 7 villagers to help look after it. The villagers did not know that these were spirituality animals and plants, they only knew that these were things raised and cultivated by some rich person. Odysseus felt that after his advancement, his pace was much faster than before. A journey that originally took 3 hours now only took an hour and a half. This was a fenced area built halfway up the mountain, where not only a flock of mutated flamingos were raised, but also a group of red bees and fire-patterned sables, and additionally, spirituality plants such as blazing red maple trees, red-crested impatiens, and scarlet lilies were cultivated. The person guarding this place was old Anlier. After learning that Odysseus wanted a batch of mutated flamingos, he put on the protective gear provided by Odysseus, took a catching pole, and entered the enclosure to capture them. These spirituality-rich creatures are only smarter and more aggressive than normal creatures. Ordinary people can capture them with professional tools. While Anlier went to catch the mutated flamingos, Odysseus walked along the fence, checking the outer array. The area around the fence was almost barren, forming a bare path. Not just the surroundings, but the vegetation of the entire hill outside the fence looked somewhat withered. The array was composed of hard granite blocks, on which mystical symbols were carved with special materials. As Odysseus was concentrating on his inspection, a female voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "This is the first time I've seen this style of array." The sudden voice startled Odysseus. "Next time, could you say something before you speak?" As he spoke, he looked around, but still did not see Bernadette's shadow. "I can have a formless servant pat your shoulder or back first." "Forget it," Odysseus quickly said, "that would be even scarier. Especially feeling someone pat you but not seeing them, it was like a ghost story scenario." Odysseus thought for a moment. "How about this, you can write, 'I'm here,' anywhere in front of me, so at least I'll have some warning." "No problem." Bernadette sounded very agreeable. "Let's continue our previous topic. If I'm not mistaken, this array can concentrate all the spirituality of the entire hill inside the fence, right?" "Yes," Odysseus admitted frankly. After all, the other party was also an expert and had already seen the function of this array. He found a stone to sit on, took out his pipe. To be precise, most of the spirituality is concentrated inside the fence, not all. Bernadette immediately understood. The material for carving the mystical symbols is the issue. Every single item is perfect. "Exactly," Odysseus said as he filled his pipe with tobacco. "If I used too good materials, the cost would be too high, not worth the effort, and it would also easily attract the attention of beyonders. This is just right, although the number of spirituality creatures that can be raised is limited, it's enough. Besides the materials for experiments, he could also make a small profit." In the beginning, Odysseus had only researched the array for cultivating herbs. The herbs used in mysticism are actually plants that contain higher spirituality than ordinary plants. Some people also tried to cultivate those herbs, but no matter how much they fertilized or how robust the herbs grew, the cultivated products could not meet the requirements for mystical applications. Therefore, all along, the herbs used in mysticism in the Beander world were collected from the wild. This result was because, even with sufficient fertilizer, that area did not have enough spirituality for the herbs to absorb. Lack of spirituality, of course, had no effect in mystical activities. If herbs lacking spirituality were used as auxiliary materials for potions, it would severely affect a Beander's advancement. The principle of Odysseus's array was very simple. During a study in the knowledge wilderness, he discovered that some arrays could be used to influence spirituality to achieve the goal of concentrating spirituality. This array actually existed long ago, but its function was very limited, and it was a common, six-pointed star array, only effective within a very small range. Odysseus improved this traditional array and used the concentrated abundant spirituality to cultivate many fast-growing herbs, earning his first pot of gold. Later, with his gradual improvements over 3 years, the concentrated spirituality could fully support the cultivation of spirituality plants and the breeding of spirituality creatures. After a few seconds of silence, Bernadette said again, "The Earth Mother Church's research direction was wrong." Odysseus lit his pipe, took a puff, and then smiled. "You've heard of that research too." "That's right, their direction was wrong. They kept trying to use Beander abilities to concentrate enough spirituality to create areas where spirituality plants could be cultivated on a large scale. That approach isn't wrong, but the cost is too high. It's not as cost-effective as simply buying them directly." Chapter 38, Groundbreaking Research Results. Far away in Backland City, Bernadette suddenly understood something. Audrey Gale was not just a research talent as she had previously imagined. His application of research results also exceeded Bernadette's expectations. Using the formless servant following Audrey, she said, "If I'm not mistaken, the maintenance of this magical array can be completed by ordinary people." Odysseus sat on a stone, crossing his legs. "Yes, for the magical arrays in the nearby mountains, I only participated in the initial laying work. After that, it was all maintained by these guards." Bernadette then asked, "Why didn't you turn the entire Balchus Mountains into your planting and breeding area?" "Because my power is too weak," Odysseus said, holding his pipe. "And in the past few years, I haven't had the opportunity to advance." Bernadette understood that Odysseus was well aware of what these research results meant. This was not only a huge breakthrough in mysticism but could also bring immense wealth. In this Beander-themed world, the demand for spirituality materials is huge, but due to the distribution of spirituality in the world, their output is always very limited. However, Odysseus's research results allowed for the mass cultivation of spirituality plants and the mass breeding of spirituality creatures at very low costs. It is conceivable that this would develop into an industry that monopolizes the spirituality material market. Odysseus knew very well that once the big figures in the Beander world discovered this research, he would be completely reduced to a tool. So, he simply cultivated and bred on a small scale, just enough to supply a single herb shop, not even impacting Backland's spirituality material market. Without showing profit, the big figures in the Beander world would not pay attention to this hidden plantation in the mountains. At this moment, Bernadette suddenly recalled the towering figure who had once helped Odysseus. She wondered if Odysseus had secretly taken refuge with a big figure in the Beander world because he needed protection. But as soon as she thought of this, she said, "The application of this magical array is very wide, not just for planting and breeding." However, Bernadette seemed to have no idea where exactly it could be applied. Before this, she had never considered the use of such low-level magical arrays, so she lacked relevant associations. "It can indeed be applied in many places," Odysseus smiled. "Actually, the principle of this magical array is not difficult. It's just that before this, scholars in mysticism had never thought about optimizing or modifying the structure of the magical array." Bernadette naturally understood that Odysseus was holding back on this topic, and she did not intend to press further. Instead, she brought up another topic. "I heard that you have thought about the question of the essence of spirituality." Odysseus took a puff from his pipe. "That's right, this is an unavoidable question in my research. Only by understanding what spirituality truly is can one proceed with corresponding experiments and research. Have your thoughts yielded any results? I believe that spirituality is a special energy, like a magnetic field or heat, that exists everywhere in this world." Odysseus simply described his thoughts. "It's a waste to leave this energy unused." Bernadette said, "Your idea is very novel." She paused and then added, "I believe that spirituality exists in wave-like forms. High-sequence Beanders are like large spirituality emitters, who can use their own Beander characteristic to influence spirituality within a certain range with specific wavebands. If someone prays to this high-sequence Beander, it is equivalent to sending out a co-frequency signal within the coverage of the waveband, which can be received by the high-sequence Beander and establish a connection. Of course, this also involves the relationship between Beander characteristic and spirituality." She did not provide a more in-depth explanation. Odysseus was slightly stunned. Bernadette's idea was consistent with his own. He estimated that Bernadette must have been influenced by Russell to have such an idea. After all, physics in this era was still very superficial in its research on fundamental particles. Moreover, Bernadette was very sincere in this conversation and shared some of her more advanced thoughts. Just the concepts of high-sequence Beander and Beander characteristic that she just mentioned were quite advanced knowledge for ordinary Beanders. Odysseus smiled. "The magical array in front of you indirectly proves the theory you just proposed. Theoretically, I use the magical array to change the direction of spirituality propagation. It's like throwing a stone into a pond. Normally, ripples would form outwards layer by layer, but I blocked one direction of the ripples with a wooden board, causing that layer of ripples to stop there. This was Odysseus's knowledge of physics being applied to his thoughts on spirituality. At this time, the atmosphere of academic discussion was very good. Bernadette said, but there is a problem here. If spirituality exists in a wave-like form, it should be relatively uniform. However, according to my observations, the distribution of spirituality in this world is not uniform. The spirituality in most places is similar, but in some places, the spirituality is very strong. Even if ordinary people eat the food from there or drink the water from that area, they can temporarily possess the ability of spirit vision. Odysseus smiled. I think this should be related to the source of spirituality. We can assume that the source of spirituality comes from the Earth's core, and it is constantly changing and active, with surging spirituality spreading throughout the universe in a relatively uniform state. But we are near the source of spirituality, so during the activity of this source, some obvious vibrations will occur, and thus the spirituality in some places will be stronger. This is like me throwing a stone into a pond, but the angle at which the stone enters the water cannot be perfectly vertical every time. Then, as long as there is a deviation in the angle, the ripples generated will have slight differences. Bernadette exclaimed, your analogy is very vivid. It's all right, Odysseus said, puffing on his pipe, thinking, I have to thank old man Hawking for this. A few seconds later, Bernadette said, your explanation makes a lot of sense. Today's exchange made her feel greatly benefited. She knew very well that with the current level of friendship with Odysseus, they could only discuss up to this point. If they delved deeper, it would reach their respective core research. At this moment, Odysseus heard old man Anlier calling loudly, Mr. Gale, Mr. Gale. I'm here. Odysseus knew that the old man had already hunted enough mutated flamingos. He asked the air around him, are you interested in trying the meat of mutated flamingos? Bernadette was slightly stunned. Its meat can be eaten. Of course, Odysseus said, this is a very good tonic. What are the effects? It's easy to get inflamed. Chapter 39 Dinner with the Mysterious Queen. As night fell, in the West District, at 75 Halen Avenue. Even as she sat in the living room of Odysseus's residence, Bernadette could hardly believe that she had accepted Odysseus's invitation to taste mutated flamingos, meat. She had already forgotten the last time she was so unrestrained. Perhaps it was because the afternoon's discussion was very profound, which made her somewhat interested in Odysseus's invitation, Bernadette thought. Since she was there, she stopped thinking too much and got up to look at a few artworks in the living room, only to find that they were all high-quality imitations. Bernadette smiled knowingly. This was quite similar to the Odysseus she knew. According to recent observations using her formless servant, Odysseus's entire income was basically spent on mysticism research. With his income, he could easily afford a carriage, yet he was still taking public carriages. On the shelf by the wall, these many exquisite handicrafts should be the most valuable items in the room. Bernadette saw models of steel battleships, human figures wearing strange armor yet possessing a sense of industrial beauty, and models of trains and flying castles, among others. On the top row of the shelf were two photographs. One was a personal photo of Odysseus. He wore a top hat and a suit, looking towards the front left, as if seeing his future, or perhaps looking into the distance. The one on the right was a photo of Odysseus standing in front of a herb shop. At this moment, Odysseus in the dining room called out, dinner's ready. All right. Bernadette came to the dining room, where the table was already laden with food. There was roasted meat, meat soup, fried meat, and stir-fried meat with chili, but all of this meat was from mutated flamingos. Because the magic array on the flamebolt required a total of 45 mutated flamingos, leg bones, 23 mutated flamingos were hunted. The thin, long legs, liver, blood, and 7 long tail feathers of this spirituality creature are fire-attributed spirituality materials. But the other parts are just ingredients rich in spirituality. Odysseus certainly wouldn't waste such good things. Besides 2 that were given to old man Anlier, 2 were given to the shop assistant Cain, Odysseus himself kept 5, and another 5 were sent to Max. The remaining 9 were sent to Nanmu Ballroom, to be used as gifts for courtesans to present to nobles. Those nobles were discerning and naturally knew these were good things. Of the 5 Odysseus brought back, 4 were used to prepare tonight's dinner. Additionally, he made a vegetable salad, cut a fruit platter, bought some desserts and bread, and also purchased a bottle of red wine. Thus, there was this lavish dinner spread. Bernadette looked at the dishes. They looked pretty good. At least they smelled fragrant, so she cut a piece of meat and put it in her mouth. The texture was a bit tough, but the taste was incredibly delicious. Odysseus also picked up his knife and fork. I've always been curious, do high-level beyonders like you still eat like ordinary people? Not necessarily every meal, Bernadette replied, most of the time, eating is more like a psychological comfort. She said, you seem to really enjoy photography. Even in Backland, photography was a relatively luxurious expense. Odysseus smiled and said, cameras are quite fun. Actually, he mainly wanted to experience what photography felt like in this era. At this time, box cameras already existed, and although they looked clunky, taking a relatively exquisite black and white photo was not a problem. Once you continue to advance, you'll discover even more fun things. Bernadette smiled as she put down her dining knife and snapped her fingers in the air. Odysseus immediately saw a sketchbook and a paintbrush appear beside the dining table. These two items floated in the air, an invisible force controlling the paintbrush, quickly drawing and writing on the paper. After only a dozen seconds, the paintbrush stopped, and the sketchbook turned, facing Odysseus and Bernadette. Odysseus saw that it was a realistic painting, depicting the scene of the two of them eating. Although there was only one paintbrush from beginning to end, the painting was surprisingly in color, and it was incredibly lifelike, almost like a color photograph. This made Odysseus exclaim, being a Beander is so convenient. Hearing Odysseus's somewhat surprised exclamation, Bernadette smiled and snapped her fingers again. An invisible hand took down the painting and handed it to Odysseus. Thank you, Odysseus took the painting, I'll buy a frame for it and keep it. Bernadette, however, said indifferently, it's just a painting. There was no single mistake in the content. Then they chatted while eating, and Bernadette asked again, I've always been curious, why do you put so much effort into building your intelligence network? The Mysticism Research Society had built an intelligence network within Backland's Beander world. Although it lacked intelligence on major figures in the Beander world, Odysseus could know any stir in the Beander world at the first possible moment. And Nanmu Ballroom was an intelligence network among Backland's nobles. Odysseus was well aware of many noble secrets, and when he needed to, he could use this intelligence to create enormous profits. The reason is simple. Odysseus raised his glass, took a small sip of wine, and then said, intelligence is a very valuable, yet relatively safe, commodity. Let me give you an example. If you need certain intelligence about Backland, you'd most likely buy it from me, rather than capture and interrogate me, right? Bernadette also raised her glass in response. What if you encounter a lunatic like those from the Aurora Order? They might just kill you and then telepathy to get the information. That's why I cooperate with the Orthodox churches. Odysseus smiled, the Aurora Order is an exception. No matter what I do, encountering lunatics from the Aurora Order is very dangerous. Bernadette then revealed her true purpose. I learned that there are also members of the Aurora Order in the gatherings you host. They are indeed very dangerous, but as long as you grasp their needs, you can also make use of them, Odysseus said. Of course, I know it's dangerous, so I've always kept them from finding me. As for divination or other methods of searching, the knowledge wilderness naturally helps block them, so there's no need to worry about being found by this group of lunatics. Odysseus laughed, but I can find them. Bernadette slowly nodded. As long as there wasn't too deep a connection with the Aurora Order, it was fine. Afterward, their conversation lightened, mainly discussing plays, operas, interesting anecdotes from Backland, and so on. Around 9 in the evening, after eating and drinking their fill and having some tea by the fireplace, Bernadette bid farewell. Odysseus had originally intended to see her to the door, but Bernadette disappeared right in front of the fireplace. He stretched, but didn't rest immediately. Instead, he began preparing for tomorrow's Mysticism Research Society meeting. Tomorrow, Zio Derecha will attend as a new member. Chapter 40, Shu's Lament. Saturday morning, south of the bridge, Tutuva Street No. 22. Huo was ready by 6 in the morning, waiting for the carriage to pick her up for the gathering. Last night's Backland Post published information about the gathering's time. It was scheduled for 9 a.m. today. Furs appeared in the living room in her pajamas, yawning. Huo, I'm here to see you off. Huo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Furs, have you forgotten? Under the influence of Emperor Russell, seeing off has other connotations. Furs scratched her messy hair. I only meant it literally. Besides, your trip this time isn't very dangerous. Thump thump thump. At this moment, there was a knock on the door, but no one called out. Huo waved to Furs, opened the door, and saw a coachman dressed in black. He said nothing, only made a, please get in, gesture. Huo jumped into the carriage and saw that there was indeed a silver mask with 3 mystical symbols engraved on it, and a hooded cloak inside the compartment. She placed 5 solar cash on the seat, then put on the mask and the cloak. Afterward, Huo began to carefully observe her surroundings to keep track of her real-time location. Around 8 o'clock, Huo arrived at the gathering place. A waiter was already waiting there. As he invited Huo in, the waiter told Huo, even if it's not the day of a gathering, if you need help, you can write a letter or come here in person to seek assistance. But the leader only promises that he will provide help if he can. If he cannot help, please quickly think of other solutions. Additionally, if you have any time-sensitive intelligence you wish to trade, you can also use this method to complete the transaction as soon as possible. Huo disguised her voice, saying in a rather hoarse tone, "Understood." This was another rather strange point. The organizer would actually make such a promise. She chose a corner seat and quietly waited for the gathering to begin. Soon, another participant arrived. The person was wearing the same style of mask and cloak as Huo. "Oh. Has the new member already passed the assessment?" Huo was slightly taken aback, a little unsure how the other person recognized her as a new member. The other person seemed to see the confusion beneath Huo's mask. He smiled and said, "This gathering has fixed members, and we haven't recruited new ones for a long time. Well, alright, mainly your height is a bit special." Huo felt a bit helpless. She was even wearing height-increasing shoes today, and she was still discovered. Soon, other members arrived one after another. Around 8:40, Huo saw her referrer, Byron. Although the other person was also wearing a mask, Huo knew it was him. After another 10-odd minutes, the basement door opened. Just as Byron had described earlier, the leader emerged from the basement and unhurriedly sat down on the chair facing everyone. At exactly 9 o'clock, the leader announced, "The gathering begins." "Very good, everyone is here this time." Odysseus, wearing a mask, smiled and said, "First, I'll introduce the new member. The investigation into the new member concluded yesterday. As her referrer, the lion said, she has stable channels in the East District. Those with relevant needs can approach the new member. Additionally, for convenience of address, the new member needs to choose a nickname for herself." The lion, Byron breathed a slight sigh of relief. As long as Huo passed the investigation, the information he had been interrogated into revealing by Huo would not count as a leak, and he would not be punished. Huo felt everyone's gaze on her. She thought for a moment, then stood up and said, "Owl." Odysseus thought to himself, "I thought you'd choose Corgi." After polite applause and welcome, the gathering officially began. The hound spoke first. "Leader, I heard that a thief infiltrated the Russell Memorial Exhibition. I hope to obtain relevant intelligence." Huo was slightly startled. "What? A thief infiltrated? Why haven't I heard about it?" She and Furs had gone together a few days ago, and everything seemed normal. Other members were also very interested in this, but they knew that such information would certainly not be free, so they were merely interested. £50. Odysseus quoted. "No problem." The hound readily agreed. Odysseus took the portable writing board handed to him by the waiter, and as he wrote down the information that could be used for the transaction, he said, "You all continue." The giraffe, whose neck was longer than an average person's, seemed to understand something, so the leader, acquiring Emperor Russell's relics, is for. He only spoke to this point and did not continue. A plump-looking member smiled and said, "The leader wouldn't think that the criminal would be foolish enough to come and sell Emperor Russell's relics, would he?" Everyone looked sideways. The female member, Peacock, said, "Honestly, it's a miracle that the elephant has survived until now." The elephant was the nickname of that plump member. He didn't attend the last gathering. Every single detail, every single word, every single sentence is correct. The hound, however, said, "It's not ruled out that criminals might have internal strife due to uneven distribution of spoils, nor is it ruled out that criminals are very short on money." He spread his hands. "There are many cases solved using such simple methods." All right. The elephant waved his hand and said, "I need an extraordinary creature for an experiment, preferably a beast, preferably already subdued and not too dangerous." The other members were slightly stunned for a moment before realizing they finally had a chance to mock the elephant. Who would carry an extraordinary creature around with them? Is the elephant going to test if his strength is greater than an extraordinary creature? No, the elephant is also an extraordinary creature. His main ability is to provoke, speak unpleasantly, and make people want to punch him. Ha ha ha. For a moment, the gathering became very lively. The elephant tried to argue multiple times but was interrupted by other members, and he sat there fuming, saying, "Foolish ideas." At this moment, Odysseus finished writing the information and had the waiter hand it to the hound. He smiled at the elephant, and said, "You should just stick to selling your potions." He knew very well that this fellow was the fat pharmacist. He had forgotten the exact name, but he remembered this person. The elephant sighed and said, "I've brought quite a few potions. You know their effects. Feel free to ask if you want any." "Oh, right, I forgot there's a newcomer. A brief introduction. I have potions that quickly heal injuries, potions that make you berserk but stronger, and potions for men that, oh, sorry, you probably don't need that kind of potion, unless you're very dissatisfied with your husband or male companion's activities in bed at night. Huo had originally intended to inquire about the injury healing potions, but when she heard the latter part, she decisively dismissed the idea. The elephant's potions quickly sold out. At this point, the peacock suddenly said, "Everyone, I've received accurate news. The culprit of the serial killing case has a master." At this moment, the elephant, who had not attended the previous gathering, was somewhat surprised. What master? The peacock briefly explained it to him. When Huo heard that the culprit of the serial killing case was actually an extraordinary creature, she was even more surprised than the elephant. Then she sighed. Why do I have a misconception that I am not living in Backland? Among some well-known events, why are there so many hidden secrets? The elephant mumbled. It also has a master. If I get a chance, I'll communicate with him. Chapter 41 The Limit of Sin. The intelligence mentioned at the Mysticism Research Society initiated by the leader was somewhat beyond Zio's expectation, even making her feel a sense of unfamiliarity with Backland. I want to post a mission. The hound, who had quickly scanned the intelligence provided by the leader, continued after paying £50 for the information. Help me investigate who this person contacted during his lifetime. After speaking, he took out a portrait and unfolded it. I will provide detailed information about this person, and some of the people he contacted during his lifetime. As long as you find contacts not on the list, it's £10 each, with no upper limit. People he contacted within the last 3 months. Odysseus saw that it was the portrait of the deceased Punisher informant. This was the 3rd time he had encountered this person. The first time was when Enoch reported that someone was looking for this informant. The second time was on the night of the underground boxing match. He saw the person himself during the competition, but soon after, the person became a corpse lying on the ground. This was the 3rd time he had seen that face. Odysseus knew very well that this person died at the hands of the royal guard, and it likely involved nobles, and even some secrets of the royal family. It was best not to provoke it if possible. Then he pondered. Regarding the assassination of this informant, he wondered if the royal guard had cooperated with MI9. Now the hound from MI9 was investigating who this informant had contacted during his lifetime. It seemed that after killing the target, they did not get a satisfactory result. At this moment, Zio raised her hand. I can try to take this mission. If there was detailed information, a £10 commission was quite generous. She felt she could look at the information first, perhaps she could find some clues. The newcomer is very active, aren't they? The hound smiled. Who else is willing to take this mission? I brought 3 sets of information in total. Soon, 2 other members also accepted the mission. The hound's credit had always been excellent, and indeed, the commission for this mission was quite generous. After the hound's mission posting ended, Byron the lion, who had been somewhat quiet today, suddenly said, "My previous commission has new developments. After about a week of staking out in the East District, I discovered that someone was secretly kidnapping vagrants. I followed that group and finally found that they were holding people in a warehouse in the dock area. There, I saw Cape Town." The other members were slightly stunned, and one of them said indignantly, "This doesn't seem surprising. That scoundrel will get his comeuppance sooner or later." Several other members also condemned Cape Town one after another. Even in Backland's Beander world, this guy had a terrible reputation. The leader, Odysseus, interrupted everyone's condemnation. He asked the lion, "You seem to want to continue investigating." "Yes," the lion said with a very firm tone. "I want to gather more evidence, then hand it over to reporters to expose this villain's atrocities. Perhaps you don't know, but in that warehouse, the fate of those vagrants was tragic. They were sorted like livestock, and anyone weak or sick would simply be thrown into the deep waters of the Tasak River. Each of them had stones tied to them, and no one could float back up." Zio suddenly interrupted the lion. "Wait a minute, you mean each of them had stones tied to them?" "Yes, very cruel, isn't it? Didn't you notice the problem with that?" Zio first asked back, then answered her own question. If they didn't meet Cape Town's requirements, those weak vagrants should have just been driven away. Why bother tying stones to them? At this point, most members understood. Doing so was too much trouble, and in the eyes of these human traffickers, perhaps a vagrant was not even as valuable as the rope used to tie stones. The lion also understood. They were eliminating witnesses. After a few seconds of silence in the living room, the hound suddenly reminded, "I've heard of Cape Town. He has a strong background. I suggest not to continue investigating. His warning to this extent was already the utmost he could do. The lion looked at the leader opposite him. May I ask for your advice? Odysseus said, clearly, you don't intend to listen to our advice. The lion paused for a few seconds before saying, He took a deep breath. All this time, I haven't considered myself a good person, and I've seen too many dark things in Backland. But this time, I feel that Cape Town's actions have exceeded my limit. It's hard to imagine, hundreds of lives just sank into the cold water like that. They struggled, they cried out. But they were too weak, even their cries couldn't reach the shore. After another 1 or 2 seconds of silence in the living room, Odysseus said, if you encounter danger, you can come to me. I will try my best to save your life. Counting it, Cape Town seemed to be nearing his end. Stepping on such a grasshopper after autumn didn't matter. The lion stood up and said, thank you, thank you. I knew you wouldn't ignore it. The hound and the peacock shook their heads, seemingly puzzled by the lion's actions. Zio deeply looked at the leader and then at the lion. Byron's determination exceeded her expectations, and the leader's promise also exceeded her expectations. Not a single mistake, not a single omission, not a single extra character. This was not what usually happened at a Beander gathering. The elephant suddenly said, if the leader has an accident, will the Church of Steam and Machinery send someone else to preside over the gathering? The peacock looked at him, will you die if you don't speak? The elephant explained, I just purely have such a question. After all, this gathering is quite good. At least I feel quite at ease participating in this gathering. Odysseus smiled, perhaps they will send someone else. The topic ended there, and the intelligence exchange quickly resumed. After several transactions were successfully completed, a member said, everyone, I have something that puzzles me greatly. Why do strange things appear after a Beander dies? Someone then asked, did you kill a Beander? I didn't kill him. This member did not elaborate. At this moment, the member, Wolverine, said, honestly, I also have similar doubts. Regarding this question, it was immediately clear who were wild Beyonders and who were organized Beyonders. People like the hound, peacock, Wolverine, and elephant clearly did not have similar doubts. This intelligence is very high level, Odysseus said. But it's not untradeable. I can explain some of its principles. The total price is £500. This information is worth that price. Oh, everyone was surprised that the price of this intelligence was so expensive. But fortunately, the leader said, total price, which was a unique trading method of the Mysticism Research Society. As long as the buyers involved in the transaction gathered enough for the total price, the transaction could proceed. For example, if the total price was £500 and 10 people participated in the transaction, each person would need to pay £50. Such an amount of money would then be within an acceptable range. Although Zio knew the concept of Beander characteristic, she did not know the specific principles, so she also participated in this transaction. For this, she reluctantly paid £26 and 7 solar. But the moment she got the answer, she immediately felt relieved. The intelligence provided by the leader stated, that is called Beander characteristic, and it is most likely the most valuable thing on a Beander. Beander characteristic will not be destroyed, will not diminish, it merely transfers from one carrier to another. Chapter 42 5 pages of Russell's diary. The intelligence Odysseus provided to everyone included a detailed explanation of what Beander characteristic was, and also mentioned a little about the law of immutability of Beander characteristic and the law of convergence of Beander characteristic. This immediately made Huo feel that her money was well spent. This clearly looked like very high-level intelligence, and here, it could be bought for just over £20. What she didn't know, however, was that her good friend Furs had just learned this information at the Tarot Club and was currently racking her brain trying to figure out how to naturally tell her. In the living room, the members who had just received the intelligence fell silent because they immediately realized one thing: Beyonders were walking pounds. According to the intelligence provided by the leader, Beander characteristic was expensive and could even replace the main material for a potion. So, even if there was no hatred between two Beyonders, as long as one of them coveted the other's Beander characteristic, a desperate struggle was very likely to ensue. Immediately afterward, they became wary of the people around them, but then they thought that this gathering was relatively reliable, and only then did they feel a little relieved. Soon, they began to suspect the few Beyonders they usually interacted with, but then they breathed a sigh of relief because only a limited number of people knew this knowledge. Their early access to this knowledge gave them a great advantage. While this transaction was ongoing, other intelligence transactions were also taking place. One piece of intelligence caught Odysseus's attention. A wealthy businessman in Backland named Blair had posted a high commission task, to wander around Backland in a carriage he provided on the night of the full moon. It was said that this wealthy businessman had a whim to conduct an experiment to see if there was a higher chance of encountering ghosts on a full moon. This task could only be accepted by a Beander, and many members expressed disappointment, as they had originally wanted to earn this money. This seemed like a wealthy businessman throwing his money around, researching some ridiculous things. However, Odysseus, with his rich experience in intelligence work, immediately realized that this matter was unusual and further guessed that it might be related to the Rose school of thought. Firstly, the specific condition of full moon made people think of werewolves and vampires. But Odysseus also thought that Sharon and Klein had just clashed with the licentious faction of the Rose School, and Sharon and Marich would surely be hiding recently. Perhaps only on the full moon could clues about them be found. After all, there was only one crimson moon crown, either Sharon or Marich would use it. On the full moon, one of them would be very weak, which might cause some strange phenomena around their hiding place. Odysseus did not show concern for this matter, but he had already decided in his heart to go directly to the Backland Mechanical Research Society later and tell Max this intelligence and his conjecture. After another half-hour of trading, everyone's intelligence had been exchanged and communicated. In the final stage of the gathering, Giraffe stated that he had collected some of Emperor Roussel's notes and wanted to sell them to the leader. Odysseus picked up the notes and roughly sorted them. There were 18 pages in total, and the paper looked somewhat yellowed. He took out 9 of them. The symbols on these pages are similar to the notes displayed at the memorial exhibition, they are fakes. He was collecting Emperor Roussel's relics, so he didn't want copied items. Then he sorted out 4 more pages. The paper of these 4 pages is problematic, they are also fakes. In fact, the sentences were incoherent, clearly forged. Giraffe sighed, I didn't expect you to have such unique insight and understanding in antiques as well. Odysseus smiled, I'll take these 5 pages, £10 per page. This was indeed a good price. Generally, a handwritten page of Roussel's diary could sell for £1 or £2, and if it was genuine, the price would be between £5 and £8. But to show that it was a high-price acquisition, Odysseus gave a little more, as he wasn't spending his own money anyway. Afterward, others came to trade Roussel's relics with Odysseus. Odysseus was not in the antique business, so of course, he couldn't distinguish whether they were genuine or not. He could only determine it by divination. At the seer stage, the results Odysseus obtained using astrolabe divination were similar in level to a seer. But it was limited to astrolabe divination, unless aided by a ritual. Other types of divination yielded much worse results compared to a seer. After Odysseus was promoted to melee scholar, his divination ability improved slightly. To be precise, it wasn't the divination ability that improved, but his spirituality became stronger, so the divination results were slightly more accurate than before. For overly complex divinations, the results were still very vague, but he could still distinguish between genuine and fake. From the many relics, Odysseus only spent £80 to acquire a fountain pen once used by Emperor Roussel. It was a fountain pen with Intis-style carvings on the cap. It was surprising that it could still be used after more than 100 years. After confirming there were no more genuine items, Odysseus announced that the gathering was over. He returned to the basement of 77 Hilton Avenue, South Green Park. He removed his mask and cloak, transforming back into Odysseus, the herb shop owner. This time, Odysseus simply took a taxi carriage to the Backland Mechanical Research Society. In the carriage, he took out those 5 pages of the diary and began to read them. May 12. Today, Bishop Van Esten and I discussed what the Savant pathway truly represents. After the discussion, I realized that this was quite helpful for my acting. Every pathway seems to have a core meaning, and no matter what sequence's acting is, it seems it cannot deviate too far from this core meaning. For example, in my Savant pathway, the Savant's abilities in learning, understanding, and practice are strengthened, and he can recall all knowledge-related things he has seen before. Sequence 8, Archaeologist, also uses his knowledge to draw conclusions about events. Further on, although the professions involved are different, the qualitative changes brought by the potion seem to strengthen me in terms of learning and utilizing knowledge, especially in the utilization of knowledge. This makes my hands-on ability extremely strong, which is the biggest difference from a reader. What about other pathways? Did they also have such a core meaning? For example, if the core meaning of the mystery prior pathway is knowledge itself, then all acting cannot depart from the concept of knowledge. What about the hunter pathway? Can't it depart from tough guy? Ha ha ha, that reminds me of that idiot Florent again. After reading this page of the diary, Odysseus vaguely remembered that Florent was a member of the Sauron family, who mastered the hunter pathway. One of his ancestors was suspected to have been female, turning into a true iron-blooded man after reaching sequence 4. Roussel had tried to ridicule this noble several times because of this. Then Odysseus slowly nodded. Roussel occasionally thought about some profound things too. For example, this page of the diary reminded Odysseus that even as a melee scholar, when acting, he should not deviate from the core meaning of knowledge. Chapter 43 Russell's Thought Experiment. Odysseus had some ideas on how to roleplay as a melee scholar, but he always felt he hadn't grasped the crucial point. Roussel's reminder made him realize that the core of the roleplay should not deviate from knowledge itself. When Odysseus previously engaged in underground boxing, he felt that fighting others was merely roleplaying, and his potion showed no signs of being digested. Now he finally understood. Combat was only for accumulating practical experience, but the core of the roleplaying was still to ponder the knowledge that could be gained from combat. As for what knowledge he could gain, Odysseus immediately thought of things like boxing manuals. He thought about it carefully. In this Beander world, although there were many combat styles, those styles basically only had a general outline, and no systematic books explaining combat. Odysseus felt he could try writing such a book, but at the same time, he also needed to focus on practical combat. The experience, cases, and reflections on combat gained from real battles should be the true essence of roleplaying as a melee scholar. Thinking of this, he continued browsing, turning to the second page of the diary. This page was an analysis of the Sauron family, the former royal family of Intis. It was evident that Roussel was already preparing to overthrow the royal family when he wrote this diary entry. This analysis was quite brilliant but outdated, as the Sauron family had long since declined. According to some intelligence Odysseus had inadvertently obtained, this family seemed to no longer have any angels. At least not overtly. Even if there were hidden angels, their condition likely wouldn't be good. The content on the third page was also interesting. It detailed Roussel's process of inventing the flush toilet not long after he transmigrated. The content on the fourth page once again caught Odysseus's attention. June 11th. Today, I once again attended a secret gathering of that ancient organization. I heard one of the members discussing mystical symbols and found it quite interesting. That member believed that mystical symbols should possess greater power, and magic arrays should not merely be decorative. He gave an example. He discovered an incomplete magic array in an elf relic he had inadvertently obtained. The mystical symbols used by the elf were completely different from the currently common symbols. This member replicated that magic array, and even in its incomplete state, electricity appeared within the array. He speculated that a complete magic array should emit a bolt of lightning. This is very interesting. If it's a complete magic array, can I use it to replace a generator? But there's a fatal flaw. It requires continuous injection of spirituality into the magic array. Haha, a group of Beyonders injecting spirituality into a magic array to generate electricity. I might as well directly ask an ocean songster to discharge electricity. However, upon hearing my request, that ocean songster would most likely strike me with a lightning bolt. At the gathering, just as that member lamented how difficult it was to complete the elf magic array, other members immediately voiced different opinions. Two of the members' remarks were particularly insightful and hit the nail on the head. One said, "This is a world primarily based on Beander characteristic." One said, "Magic arrays are very inconvenient to carry and can only be used in fixed locations." Yes, one problem is that any Beander ability in this world is inseparable from Beander characteristic and spirituality. Especially Beander characteristic, some advanced magic arrays require Beander characteristic intervention to display powerful Beander abilities. As for being inconvenient to carry, that's another fatal flaw. Instead of researching such a hopeless magic array, it's better to directly buy a few scrolls from a scrolls professor. After reading this diary entry, Odysseus couldn't help but sigh. This world is not short of intelligent people. More than 100 years ago, people had already realized the broader uses of magic arrays, but the limitations of writing in that era restricted their research. Thinking of this, Odysseus revealed a knowing smile. The reason he had such profound research in this area was that he possessed an advantage that no Beander scholar in this world did. He understood a pictographic script. After arriving in this world and conducting some research, Odysseus discovered that the mystical symbols of this world resembled the evolution of a pictographic script. He conducted some research in this direction and found that it was indeed the case. Mystical symbols were a special kind of pictographic script. The civilizations of the North and South continent should have also used pictographic scripts, but around the Second Epoch, alphabetic scripts became mainstream, and pictographic scripts disappeared into the long river of history. The evolution and research of mystical symbols stopped in that era, so Odysseus tried to further deduce mystical symbols, and sure enough, they could achieve better effects. This process was somewhat like deducing oracle bone script or bronze inscriptions using simplified characters. Although the process was extremely difficult, for Odysseus, there were always traces to follow. Odysseus reread the diary entry. It is said that the elf came from the West Continent, and the West Continent should have inherited pictographic scripts, so the magic arrays used by the elf should be different from those of the North and South Continent, and very likely more effective. He suddenly thought that he could try to inquire in the knowledge wilderness, to see if he could find some elf texts and magic arrays. Every single word and content was perfect. Continuing to read, the 5th page was also interesting. It was Roussel evaluating the figures of two noblewomen in the process of getting to know them to having deep interactions. It wasn't entirely uninteresting, it could be read as a novel with ambiguous plots. Putting away the diary, Odysseus planned to submit these 5 pages of the diary to the Church of Steam and Machinery later to reimburse the cost of purchasing the diary. Then, during the Tarot Club, he would submit them again, or he could submit them to Fool in 2 separate instances, as a thank you for the help Fool had provided earlier. Now, Odysseus had an exceptional memory, he wouldn't forget anything after just one read, so he didn't need to make a copy for his records. About 20 minutes later, the carriage arrived at the Backland Mechanical Research Society. Odysseus found Max and, in an undisturbed reception room, explained his conjecture about the suspicious wealthy merchant Blair. Of course, his conjecture would not include names like Sharon. He only said that Max had previously told him that a battle had recently occurred within the Rose School of Thought at an abandoned West Byron shipyard, which led to his conjecture. Although Odysseus repeatedly stated that this was merely a conjecture based on his feelings, Max took it very seriously because Odysseus's intuition had helped them disrupt the operations of evil secret organizations multiple times. Next, Odysseus also reported that one of their members was investigating Cape Town. Max was about to report this intelligence upwards when he noticed Odysseus didn't leave immediately, so he asked, "Do you have anything else to add?" Odysseus said, "I also received a few relics of Emperor Roussel." Max understood, for reimbursement. Chapter 44 Extraordinary Fighting. Odysseus spent a total of £130 to acquire Roussel's relic. However, when he filed for reimbursement, he claimed to have spent £151, including a £20 handling fee, and £1 for a rented carriage. Of course, renting a carriage certainly wouldn't cost £1. After successfully obtaining the money, Odysseus generously took a rented carriage back to the herbal shop. But as soon as he entered, he found 2 uninvited guests in the herbal shop: Simon, the owner of the underground fighting arena, and Gers, the manager. Cain, the attendant, came up and said, "Sir, these 2 have been waiting for over an hour." Odysseus nodded. "I know." He sat opposite Simon. "Didn't I tell you? I'm not interested in your cooperation." Simon still smiled with that mischievous look. "Last time I told you I knew some relatively secret information, but it seems you didn't take it seriously." "Then let me be more specific. I heard that people from the church like to catch people like you, who possess miraculous abilities." Odysseus said coldly, "Do you want me to give you a map of Backland and tell you how to get to the main cathedrals of the 3 churches? If you have decent channels, you'll know I'm not afraid of your threat at all." Simon was slightly stunned. He clearly hadn't expected Odysseus to say that. While he was judging whether the herbal shop owner in front of him was lying, he said, "Nobles also need some more stimulating entertainment. In Empress Borough, they have. Empress Borough's King's Avenue 155 has a special fighting arena, doesn't it?" Odysseus sneered, "Comparing intelligence with me. I also know your real name isn't Simon, but Dills, and you have a daughter fostered with distant relatives, living at 349 Hilland Avenue in St. George's District. Because you're afraid your enemies will come looking for you, you've never dared to keep her by your side." Simon's mouth fell open, his face full of disbelief. Sir, I didn't mean anything else." Odysseus took out his pipe. "Everyone has weaknesses, don't they?" Simon immediately stood up. "I'm very sorry for inconveniencing you. We'll leave now. Please don't be angry." Odysseus, however, pointed to the chair opposite. "Sit down." Simon had no choice but to obediently sit down. Odysseus lit his pipe, took a puff, and said again, "I can go and fight a few matches, but we're not cooperating. Instead, you'll be working for me. After each match, I will pay you 1/10 of the remuneration received. Besides the matches, you are to handle all other trivial matters." Also, forge me an identification document. I don't want to use my real identity to participate in the fighting there. The fighting arena at King's Avenue 155, to be precise, is a Beander fighting arena. The nobles of Loan, on the surface, appear cautious, elegant, and graceful, but in reality, they also have a sinister, obscene, extravagant, and violence-worshipping side. Fighting arenas have always existed in Backland, but in modern times, these fighting arenas moved underground and gradually disappeared from public view. However, nobles still enjoy watching life and death matches, and among them, Beander fighting is the most popular among nobles. Odysseus heard that the ticket price for just one entry was as high as £100. After being promoted to melee scholar, Odysseus had thought about fighting a few matches there to hone his practical combat abilities. Before his promotion, Odysseus knew his combat strength was about as good as a goose's, so he tried not to engage in fights with people. Even if he did, he had Flamebolt and a scepter, so ordinary low-sequence Beanders were not his match. If he accidentally provoked a mid-sequence Beander, he would simply seek help from the machinery hivemind. Of course, such a thing had never happened in 3 years. But it's different after becoming a melee scholar. He needs to fight more often to hone his abilities in actual combat. He had long thought about trying his hand at that fighting arena, which would not only exercise himself but also earn money. As for performing for nobles, Odysseus had no psychological burden in that regard. However, he had always lacked a proper channel to enter the underground fighting arena in Empress Borough. He didn't want to associate going to the fighting arena to fight with Mr. Gale and Leader. Unexpectedly, Simon presented a good opportunity. Earlier, at the underground fighting arena in the bar, when Simon proposed cooperation, Odysseus had already planned to use this channel to go to the fighting arena in Empress Borough. However, he certainly wouldn't let a small-time person like Simon manipulate him. At the same time, he knew very well that Simon would not give up, and today's meeting was inevitable, so Odysseus made some preparations in advance to seize the initiative in this matter. Simon was very happy to hear that there was a turn for the better in this matter. No problem. Even 1/10 is a considerable income. As the owner of the bar's underground fighting arena, he looked very glamorous, earning hundreds of pounds a night when there were matches, but this kind of grey income required a backer, otherwise there would certainly be constant trouble. A large portion of that income, Simon had to give to his backer. Every single detail is correct. The income from serving Odysseus, he could put into his own pocket, and he would also have the opportunity to meet some of Backland's upper-class figures. Simon promised to report on the progress of the matter tomorrow, then politely bid farewell to Odysseus. Odysseus looked at his pocket watch and said to Cain, "Let's go to the backyard. Today I'll teach you how to process the leg bones of mutated flamingos." Processing those leg bones didn't require much skill, Cain could do it. South of the bridge, 22 Tutwa Street. Zio Derecha returned to her residence, and to her surprise, Furs was already awake and writing furiously at her desk. "Hugh, you're back." Furs looked up and smiled, asking, "Any news from that mysterious gathering?" That was a very peculiar gathering. Hugh hung her coat on the hanger and casually asked, "Are you rushing a manuscript today?" The smile on Furs's face immediately disappeared. "Yes, the deadline is tomorrow, and I've only written the beginning." Hugh slowly nodded. She knew that was the case, otherwise Furs wouldn't be up so early. "Now only hearing some strange tales can soothe my anxious heart." Furs turned her chair towards Hugh. "Quick, tell me, what mysterious things happened at that gathering?" "It wasn't that mysterious." Hugh sat opposite Furs, eager to talk. The convener of the gathering actually promised to protect Byron. She briefly recounted Byron's investigation and the conversation between Byron and Leader. This was a very peculiar aspect. They had attended so many Beander gatherings, but no initiator of a Beander gathering would make such a promise. He must have a sense of justice. Furs commented. Chapter 45, Mechanical Heart, Attacks. Hugh talked about other things he had seen at the gathering, and when he mentioned that the perpetrator of the serial killing case was a Beander creature, Furs was very surprised. A Beander creature. "I was as surprised as you when I heard that news," Hugh said with a smile. Furs gave an unnatural laugh. In fact, she had heard some information about the serial killing case perpetrator at the Tarot Club, knowing he was a Beander of the demon pathway, but she didn't know he was a Beander creature. "Oh, right, I also got a very high-level piece of intelligence," Hugh said, as if presenting a treasure. "It cost me more than £20. When she learned that the high-level intelligence was the concept of Beander characteristic, Furs said somewhat perfunctorily, "Wow, that's amazing." Cough, cough, she cleared her throat and said, "Now that you mention it, I also got a high-level piece of intelligence at a gathering." At this moment, her heart was screaming, "Don't waste money like this anymore." Just explaining some theories of Beander characteristic cost £500, but at the Tarot Club, the acting method was only £200. West District, Green Park North Street. The nobleman named Blair lived here. Eakinser Bernard, the machinery hivemind deacon and Backland's chief captain, personally led a team to visit this wealthy man as police officers. 3 carriages entered the courtyard gate of this luxurious villa. Everything looked normal here. Gardeners were tending to the garden, and bodyguards were patrolling with dogs. Upon arriving in front of the villa, Eakinser and his team met the owner of the villa. He looked a bit thin, as if he hadn't slept well. As soon as Eakinser got out of the carriage, Blair came forward to shake his hand, but the chief captain suddenly shouted, "Fire!" The door of the second carriage suddenly opened, revealing a cannon barrel as thick as a thigh inside, inscribed with dense, strange patterns. This carriage had obviously been modified. This strange small cannon was fixed inside, and as the carriage opened in 4 directions, it had an almost 180-degree firing angle. 2 machinery hivemind members operated this small cannon and had already prepared to fire. When Eakinser gave the order, the cannon barrel quickly glowed, changing the color of the strange patterns. A golden fireball flew out of the cannon barrel and hit a window. Boom! After a violent explosion, the sound of ghosts wailing and wolves howling came from inside the room. Beander combat instantly erupted. While the Beander cannon was bombarding, Eakinser took out a somewhat classical flintlock pistol. Bang! He fired a shot at Blair in front of him, launching a blazing white bullet. Blair's expression suddenly turned ferocious, and more than a dozen ice crystal-like thin arrows appeared in front of him, but the bullet passed through these thin arrows. Just as it was about to hit Blair, he suddenly seemed to lose consciousness and fainted to the ground. Eakinser suddenly waved his hand, and the bullet suddenly changed direction, flying towards a piece of glass not far away. Hiding there was the wraith that had just left Blair's body. The wraith used mirror jump, again, dodging this advanced purification bullet which had a restrictive effect on him. Eakinser put away his gun and put on his gauntlets, staring intently at the wraith. He threw a punch, and although he was far from the enemy, it hit the wraith squarely on the chin, knocking him from the mirror into the real world. The wraith's mouth was bleeding from that punch. While continuing to dodge the bullet, he let out a scream at Eakinser, but the chief captain seemed to have a layer of illusory, star-like light around him, blocking the enemy's Beander attack. On the other side, after the explosion just now, the servants, gardeners, and bodyguards in the courtyard and villa, and even the fierce dogs, all bared their teeth and rushed towards the machinery hivemind's carriage. They were all living corpses. They had long since lost their lives. Max, the captain of the machinery hivemind squad, jumped down from the carriage. He held a long, heavy, peculiar gun in both hands, with a dark golden ammunition belt inserted into it. Max injected spirituality as he pulled the trigger. This Beander weapon was instantly activated, and a volley of purification bullets swept through, causing these zombies to fall to the ground. He glanced at Eakinser's side. Under the combined attack of the deacon's own abilities and several sealed artifacts, the wraith was already injured. It was only a matter of time before he was dealt with. The other team members couldn't help much in a Sequence 5 battle, so under Max's leadership, his squad carried the Beander small cannon from the carriage and charged the villa from the front, while another squad outflanked to the back door. As soon as they entered the villa, they saw several injured enemies attempting to escape. The Beander small cannon and Beander machine gun fired again, and a volley took them all down. At this time, the other squad, which had already circled to the backyard, had also engaged the enemy. Max did not go to support the backyard but led his team to search the first floor. They first arrived at the room that had been hit by the initial purification shell. There were 2 werewolves, and 1 zombie, here. The 2 werewolves, one dead and one severely injured, both lay on the ground. Even a zombie couldn't withstand that purification shell. He was also severely injured, and the purification effect had caused a significant weaken on him. He was stuffing his intestines back into his stomach while looking for an opportunity to escape, just as Max and his team, who were coming to finish them off, met him. Without a word, Max pulled the trigger again. A hint of fear appeared in the zombie's eyes. He dodged aside at the fastest speed, and at the same time, under his command, the dead werewolf suddenly stood up, blocking in front of him, obstructing the fatal gunshots. While this werewolf, who hadn't fully turned into a zombie, was shot in half, the zombie, who had also been hit by 2 more shots, crashed through the wall and fled towards the back door. Max immediately led his team in pursuit, but just as they reached the hall, the machinery hivemind members immediately had a premonition of danger. Before they could react, the large, luxurious carpet in the hall suddenly stood up, blocking Max and his team's vision. Immediately after, all the team members felt their collars tighten, as if the clothes they were wearing were trying to strangle them. At the same time, they found that their sleeves also tightened, and they couldn't even manage to pull their collars open. Fear of the unknown power immediately swept through everyone's minds. These well-trained team members all showed a slight look of panic. Max remained calm. He knew that the person controlling everything was nearby, so he used his still movable finger to pull the trigger, but he found that the trigger was as if welded shut, he couldn't pull it. He then realized that a powerful enemy had arrived, and he could control inanimate objects. Chapter 46, Remarks on the Release. Thank you all for your support and love, which has allowed this book to achieve excellent results. First, let's talk about the update schedule after it goes on sale. There will definitely be 4 updates tomorrow, with a minimum of 6,000 words on regular days, plus additional updates. Since it goes on sale at midnight, tomorrow's update will be around 12 AM, and the day after tomorrow's update time will revert to the morning. In August, there should be around 200,000 words updated, and in September, even more. Based on author Jun's experience with his previous books, much of the groundwork needs to be laid before reaching 300,000 to 400,000 words, so he only writes about 6,000 to 7,000 words daily. After 300,000 to 400,000 words, most of the groundwork will be complete, and writing 8,000 words a day should not be an issue. After September, he should be able to write even more. With his previous book, he updated around 270,000 to 280,000 words in a single month at most, and this book should also be able to reach that word count. Now, let's discuss the plot. This book's initial inspiration came when the protagonist in the previous book encountered the knowledge wilderness. At that time, author Jun had a question: what medium is used to transmit Beander characteristic? For example, when a Beander uses Beander characteristic to attack another Beander 15 meters away, with a distance of 15 meters between them, why can one Beander attack another Beander? Of course, this question is a bit like splitting hairs. After all, many things in Lord of the Mysteries are more idealistic. If there had to be a theoretical basis, it would lose that sense of mystery. However, author Jun also thought that this could be used to provide the protagonist with a very unique golden finger, and this golden finger is at least more sincere than a system or anything like that. So, he continued to think along this line of thought. Some readers may have noticed that author Jun has written science fiction novels before, so he came up with the idea of combining spirituality with many fundamental particle theories. Afterward, a model like this gradually formed. Everyone has a self-circulating spirituality field within their body. Potions can make this spirituality field stronger and more distorted. Once a good self-circulation is lost, the spirituality field will experience blockages or chaos, corresponding to pre-loss of control and complete loss of control. Returning to the previous question, when a Beander uses Beander characteristic to attack a Beander 15 meters away, the Beander attack is transmitted and distorted through the spirituality outside the human body, striking the opponent. This is a simple model. The true model is more complex. For example, it also needs to consider uniqueness, the relationship between Beander characteristic and spirituality, and so on. Explaining it all at once would be very boring. Author Jun will explain it here first, and it will be gradually explained through the protagonist's 3 years of research within the plot later. Yes, the protagonist has fully mastered this theory. Do you remember the model Bernadette saw when she went to the protagonist's house for dinner? The protagonist has even researched chariots and warships that are driven by spirituality and provide weapon energy. Of course, this will only be showcased in the second part of this book. The plotline for the first part will roughly follow the original work. The protagonist will play an important role in the Great Smog event and will work for the goddess once for free. Oh, I just mentioned the protagonist not advancing for 3 years. Author Jun truly did not expect this to be a point of criticism for this book. Author Jun is well aware of his limited abilities, and it's perfectly normal for some readers not to like it, as even the original work has its detractors. Finally, let's discuss the QQ group. After the book goes on sale, author Jun will announce the group number. Currently, as long as your fan value is greater than or equal to 1, you can join the group. Last but not least, and most importantly, please support the first subscription. Everyone who frequently reads on Kidian should know how crucial the first subscription is for a book. It directly affects its future recommendations and prospects. Author Jun bows again to thank everyone for their support and recognition. It is your support that makes author Jun more confident when telling stories. What author Jun can repay you with is to update as much as possible and ensure quality. Thank you for your companionship, and thank you for your love. Chapter 47 Fighting Outline. Fortunately, the powerful enemy's strength quickly vanished, the carpet settled back down, the tables and chairs remained still, and his clothes were no longer tight. The members of the machinery hivemind team, who had just been choked, could finally breathe smoothly and gasped for air. At this moment, the severely injured zombie had already escaped. Max and the others pushed aside the surrounding tables and chairs and immediately chased into the backyard, only to find that the flanking team had been blocked by the flowers, plants, and trees in the yard. Although they had eliminated 2 enemies, some still managed to escape. At this point, Ekinzer also caught up and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw no one had died. The enemy is stronger than we imagined. He was well aware that a demigod from the Rose School had intervened. Fortunately, our arrival was very sudden, and they fled in a panic. Otherwise, just one demigod would have been enough to wipe them out. Fortunately, that demigod had some reservations and did not prolong the fight, only covering his subordinates' escape. Almost all members of the machinery hivemind were injured, either from being hit by tables and chairs or pricked by plants, but their injuries were not serious. The uninjured members began to search the entire villa. Most of the people here were dead, especially the women, most of whom had died from brutal torture. After a quick search, Ekinzer and Max stood smoking while watching the busy doctors and their subordinates. Ekinzer ran his hand through his messy brown hair. This time, we need to give Odysseus a bigger bonus, otherwise, even if everyone here had died, we might not have discovered anything unusual. Max first sighed. The indulgence faction of the Rose School is as cruel and bloodthirsty as ever. Then he added, Odysseus previously expressed a desire to obtain the wizard potion formula. Ekinzer was startled. Try to persuade him to choose a different reward. The voice of the evil god will become increasingly clear at the wizard level, and he will become a huge unstable factor. Max stomped out his cigarette butt. I will try my best to persuade him. South of the bridge, in a dilapidated apartment. The escaped members of the Rose School's indulgence faction were treating their wounds while cursing the official Beyonders. In another room, a pale wraith, who didn't look alive, stood obediently in the center of the room. Suddenly, it was as if a hand grasped his heart, making him fall to his knees in agony. A phantom figure appeared on the window glass, and a cold voice simultaneously came through. Fool, it's only been a few days, and you've already exposed yourselves. The wraith quickly explained, we've always been very careful. How did the official Beyonders get the news? The wraith was also very wronged, he didn't know. On Sunday morning, the parts for the flamebolt, previously ordered from the foundry, arrived. These parts had already been ground and polished, and could be used after a thorough scrubbing. After washing and drying, Odysseus taught Cain to engrave on the parts using mutated flamingo's leg bones. There was a technique to this engraving process. Mixing the juice of agave with the blood of mutated flamingos would soften the metal for a short time. Although the softening time was only 3 seconds, it was enough to complete the engraving with the flamingo leg bones, which were much more fragile than metal. Odysseus first used a white pen to draw the engraving patterns on each part, then gave a demonstration before handing over the repetitive work to Cain. It would take at least 3 or 4 days to complete the engraving work. When it was almost noon, Simon came again. Sir, I've brought good news. You can compete on King's Avenue tonight. Since this is your first time participating, you can get £260 if you win, and £150 if you lose. Odysseus slowly nodded. Are there any rules? Simon immediately said, the competition must be completed in a designated venue, and one cold weapon can be used. When one party faints, or suffers an injury that affects their combat effectiveness and must end the match, the other party wins. If you withdraw from the competition without reason midway, you won't get a single penny. Odysseus chuckled. So, at least someone has to bleed for the match to end. Simon stood there honestly. If Odysseus didn't know his background, he could have retorted with a mocking expression, do you think the money of noble lords is that easy to earn? But at this moment, he dared not say so, and for a moment, he didn't know how to answer. Odysseus asked again, when are we going? At 6 in the evening, I'll pick you up. Odysseus nodded. Good. There was nothing to do all afternoon. Odysseus had originally planned to go to the boxing club again, but thinking that he would have a Beyonder fight tonight, he still tried to conserve his strength. So, he spent the entire afternoon pondering how to write that book about fighting. First, Odysseus intended to include 8 Extremities Fist in the book, considering it his own school. Of course, it definitely couldn't be called 8 Extremities Fist. He had already thought it through and could claim that it was a lost fighting school obtained from an antique. He had originally wanted to continue claiming that this school originated from Emperor Russell, but then he thought that Bernadette might question him, so after some thought, it was safer to keep the origin of 8 Extremities Fist vague. If this book accidentally fell into Klein's hands and he came looking for him, he would decide whether to acknowledge him as a fellow countryman or continue to feign ignorance and say it came from an elf antique, depending on the situation. Odysseus conceived and recorded on paper, and after an afternoon, he had a general idea for the book. He planned to name the book, Fighting Outline, which would first have an overview and ideological principles of fighting, then introduce 8 Extremities Fist and several common schools, followed by numerous case studies describing the techniques of using fighting in actual combat. About 100,000 words would be enough, and then he would contact a publisher. Around 5 in the afternoon, Odysseus had an early dinner and let Cain look after the shop. When it was almost 6 o'clock, Simon arrived in a hired carriage to pick up Odysseus. After getting in the carriage, Odysseus said, "First, go to Halen Avenue 75. Okay." Simon tapped the carriage and loudly told the coachman the address. Upon returning home, Odysseus first changed into a neat knight's uniform and then went to the basement. The basement was filled with an array of Neander weapons he had experimented with or made. These weapons included metal crossbows, large axes and small axes, shields, and rifles. The most numerous were swords and small axes with various functions. Finally, Odysseus chose a sword and a cane. He wrapped the sword, carried the cane out of the basement, and then took a half mask from the study. Odysseus usually didn't like carrying a cane when he went out, and he felt quite awkward carrying one today. He got back into the carriage, drove for over half an hour, and arrived at King's Avenue 155. Chapter 48 Extraordinary Fighting Competition. From the outside, King's Avenue 155 looked like a noble mansion with several large buildings, which were actually structures similar to indoor stadiums. Simon entered with his pass and, led by a cavalryman, arrived in front of a building 3 or 4 stories tall. This was the side entrance of the building. Noble carriages were arriving from the direction of the 2 main entrances. They exchanged pleasantries, greeted each other, and entered the spectator area together. Simon got out of the carriage to negotiate, and soon he invited Odysseus to disembark, then entered the tall building guided by a servant. Upon entering, there was a room the size of a living room, with seats against the walls on both sides, and 2 empty weapon racks directly ahead. A man in his 40s, dressed as a butler, came forward and said, "Welcome, gentlemen. May I ask which of you is the contestant?" Simon immediately stepped aside, highlighting Odysseus, who was wearing a mask. "I believe you are already familiar with the rules," the butler-dressed man said. "This is a competition where cold weapons can be used. Of course, for the sake of the match's entertainment, please only use your weapon after the first bell rings. Otherwise, it will be considered an unprovoked forfeit. If you are confident, you may also choose not to use a weapon at all." Simon was slightly surprised. He had not known this rule before. "Understood," Odysseus said, not overly concerned. The man dressed as a butler extended his hand. "Please present your weapon." Odysseus took out his sword and temporarily handed his cane to Simon. The other party inspected it, and seeing no issues, returned the weapon. "The match will begin in about 10 minutes. Please prepare yourselves." Odysseus nodded and sat in the corner to wait. Simon, meanwhile, smiled and followed the butler-dressed man, asking him for details about the competition. A few minutes later, Simon returned and said, "Sir, after entering that door, there will be a simulated street area. Your opponent will enter from another direction. After meeting, you must grapple for 5 to 10 minutes before the copper bell rings, only then can you use your weapon." Odysseus chuckled, then suddenly brought up an unrelated topic. "If I had such a large house, I would definitely convert it into a super laboratory." Simon was taken aback, unsure how to respond. Odysseus did not continue the topic, quietly awaiting the start of the match. A few more minutes passed, and the butler-like middle-aged man reappeared. "The match is about to begin. Please follow me." Odysseus stood up, strapped on his sword, and approached the entrance door. The middle-aged man checked his pocket watch and opened the iron gate at the designated time. Odysseus passed through the iron gate and indeed saw the staggered houses, only about 2 meters tall. The area was roughly the size of a soccer field, simulating a not very long street scene, but these houses had no roofs, so as not to obstruct the nobles' view of the match. The stands were high up, brightly lit. From below, one could not see the nobles above, but from above, the ground could be seen clearly. At the other end of the street, Odysseus saw his opponent, also a young man in his 20s. He had a saber on his back and was rushing towards Odysseus. Odysseus smiled slightly, seemingly ignoring his opponent's approach, and jumped onto the top of a wall to observe his surroundings. It wasn't that he underestimated his opponent, on the contrary, he took his opponent very seriously. However, as it was his first time in such an arena, he decided to use the time while his opponent was charging to quickly observe the environment. These roofless houses were roughly divided into 2 rows by the street in the middle, but there were alleys between the houses, leading everywhere with no dead ends. Upon seeing Odysseus's reaction, the young man, his opponent, probably understood his intention. Thus, the young man quickly charged towards Odysseus and agilely jumped onto the wall, appearing menacingly in front of Odysseus in just a few seconds. The momentum from his charge caused the young man to throw a wide, powerful punch. Odysseus's favorite 8 extremities fist and Tai Chi are both best at dealing with such fierce attacks. He extended his hand to deflect the force, parrying the opponent's attack, then suddenly leaned forward, slamming the young man into the house. This move elicited an "oh" from many nobles and wealthy individuals in the stands, their tone a mix of delight and excitement. This was a martial arts style they had never seen before. The young man, who had fallen into the house, rolled on the ground and immediately stood up, unharmed. He had rich combat experience and realized that the wall top was narrow, and his opponent seemed to be good at close-quarters combat, making fighting on the wall very disadvantageous for him. So the young man grabbed a nearby chair and threw it at Odysseus as a weapon. The rules stated that weapons could only be used after the bell rang, but a chair is furniture and cannot be considered a weapon. Every single detail, every single content, is perfect. And in these simulated rooms, there was furniture such as tables, chairs, beds, and cabinets, which was clearly designed to enhance the match's entertainment value. Odysseus agilely dodged the chair's attack, seized the opportunity, and jumped onto the bed inside the room. The young man swung the chair again. Odysseus, quick-witted, grabbed a chair leg and, using the opponent's momentum, pulled hard. The young man, unable to let go, took a step forward, bringing his chest directly in front of Odysseus. Odysseus was creating this opportunity. He kicked the young man away, who crashed against the wall with a thud, making the entire wall visibly shake. At this moment, enthusiastic applause erupted in the stands. In this second round, Odysseus's response and reaction speed were both splendid. The young man clutched his chest, gasped for breath, stood up again, and bolted out the door, escaping onto the street. He was clearly a meander, able to still run after being kicked so hard by Odysseus. The young man's reaction was not to flee, but to evade his enemy and recover from his injuries slightly. Odysseus, of course, would not miss this opportunity and immediately gave chase, but he soon realized that although his agility was sufficient, he wasn't very skilled at running techniques. The young man weaved left and right, and Odysseus, despite his close pursuit, could never quite land a hit on him. After about 10 seconds, the young man felt the pain lessen. He suddenly half-squatted and swept his leg towards Odysseus. Odysseus repeated his trick, dodging the opponent's attack, then lunged forward, aiming his knee at the young man's face. The young man's face turned pale with fright, and he hastily raised his hands to block. Thud! The young man was sent flying. Although he used his hands to block Odysseus's knee, how could the strength of his hands compare to the strength of a knee? After the young man landed, his nose and the corner of his mouth were still bleeding from the impact. His resilience was truly impressive. He still managed to roll, then scramble to his feet and run away. However, he ran unsteadily, and Odysseus caught up from behind, kicking him in the backside, sending him sprawling face first. Clang a lang. At this moment, the copper bell rang, because if it didn't ring soon, there would be no cold weapon combat segment. Chapter 49 Lelouch. When the butler-like staff member was explaining the rules earlier, there was actually an implicit rule he didn't mention. If there was too great a disparity in strength between the two sides, the copper bell would be rung in advance. However, such incidents rarely occurred, because when arranging matches, the organizers would pair opponents of similar strength. Today, an unexpected situation arose. Based on Simon's description of Odysseus, the organizers arranged a Sequence 9 level opponent for him. This young man had participated in several matches before, and his fighting skills and use of cold weapons were both excellent. The organizers originally intended to use him to suppress Odysseus, so that this newcomer wouldn't become too arrogant later on. What they didn't expect was that Odysseus hadn't used his full strength in front of Simon earlier. As a result, the young man was no match at all, so the copper bell was rung in advance. Another round of applause erupted from the stands. For the spectators, although the match was short, it was very exciting. The masked newcomer's fighting style clearly countered his opponent's aggressive offensive approach. Odysseus didn't continue his attack. Instead, he retreated a few steps and slowly drew his weapon. The young man was truly resilient. Odysseus seriously suspected that he was a meander of the warrior pathway. After spitting out a mouthful of bloody saliva, he caught his breath slightly and also drew his weapon. It was a snow-white blade that looked incredibly sharp. The young man adjusted his breathing, feeling ready to fight again, but this time he didn't attack proactively. Instead, he cautiously waited for Odysseus to make a move. Odysseus glanced at the hilt of the opponent's blade, then smiled and said, "Surrender. You've already lost." The young man snorted coldly, said nothing, and continued to stare intently at Odysseus. Finally, Odysseus made his move. The young man frowned because his opponent's sword-drawing posture was a bit awkward, or rather, seemed a bit clumsy. But the young man didn't dare to be careless. He cautiously drew his blade to block the opponent's sword. The moment his blade touched the sword, he saw sparks flash on the opponent's weapon. The next second, his whole body trembled, and half of his body was numbed by electricity. The weapon in Odysseus's hand, of course, was not just a simple cold weapon. A sword like the one he held was a Beander weapon that could instantly release high-voltage current. This was a weapon Odysseus had created while studying the world's electricity for a period of time. After creating it, he felt it was somewhat of a white elephant because the sword cost as much as 230 pounds, but an enemy could easily win with a revolver costing less than 2 pounds. So it had been kept in the basement and never used. In fact, there was nowhere to use it. He couldn't possibly carry a sword running around the streets, could he? However, in this noble fighting arena, it was precisely the place for those Beander weapons shaped like cold weapons to shine. Although the opponent's weapon's hilt, sword handle, and other parts might be made of wood and seemed non-conductive, Odysseus later discovered that to prevent the hilt or handle from detaching, such long weapons would use a metal wedge to secure the hilt to the blade or a metal hoop to fix the wooden handle. In short, in most cases, there was a conductive path. And today, Odysseus's opponent actually used a metal hilt, so he immediately shocked the opponent, causing him to tremble all over and quickly retreat. If it were an ordinary person, they would have already been electrocuted and fallen to the ground. Referee, the young man's tongue was a bit thick from the shock. His sword, there's a problem. Odysseus, however, said loudly, the rules state that one cold weapon can be brought, but there's no rule specifying whether that cold weapon can have Beander effects. The young man was greatly angered. You call this a cold weapon? Odysseus said indifferently, yes, after all, it can't fire bullets. At this moment, the referee, who was watching from above, finally said, the rules indeed do not stipulate that weapons cannot possess Beander effects. This weapon is valid. More precisely, the organizers wished for both sides to use Beander weapons, as that would make the match more visually appealing. Odysseus said again, surrender. As a qualified warrior, there is no option to surrender. The young man threw down the blade in his hand, picked up a street-side armchair, and charged towards Odysseus. Odysseus deftly dodged the opponent's attack, then stabbed him with the sword, and at that instant, released a high-voltage current again. This time, the young man was electrocuted and fell to the ground, twitching all over. Odysseus laughed, a true warrior isn't as stubborn as you. At this point, the referee announced, masked gentleman wins. Sparse applause erupted from the stands. They had hoped to see a desperate struggle, not such a one-sided battle. Odysseus, of course, didn't care about the feelings of these nobles and rich people. He put away his sword and quickly left through the iron gate. Outside the iron gate, the butler-like person from before said, Sir, please leave your name so we can arrange a new match for you. Odysseus was slightly stunned, then a smile spread across his lips, Lelouch. Not a single mistake. One sentence, one hair, one interior, one content, one by one. All right, Mr. Lelouch. The other party politely said, please wait a moment, your remuneration will be brought over shortly. Odysseus sat down again and saw a middle-aged man with two small mustaches sitting opposite him. The man carried a two-handed greatsword and was currently pressing one hand on the sword, lost in thought. He was probably the next Beander to go on stage. A minute or two later, a waiter walked quickly over and handed Odysseus 260 pounds in remuneration. They were all 10-pound banknotes and didn't look very thick. Simon politely bid farewell to the butler-like person and left in the same rented carriage they had arrived in. Once inside the carriage, Odysseus took out 3 banknotes and handed them to Simon. I'll give you an extra 4 pounds. When you have time, come here more often to get a clear understanding of the rules here. Also, try to find out information about my opponents. Simon smiled as he took the money. Yes, leave this to me. Odysseus said nothing more and had the rented carriage take him back to Halen Avenue No. 75. Back at his residence, Odysseus took off his mask, changed into loose clothes, and poured himself a glass of wine to celebrate. After his advancement, the potion hadn't been digested much these past few days, but he had already earned over 500 pounds using his new abilities. Adding Odysseus's previous savings, Bernadette's deposit, and the intelligence fees earned from the Mysticism Research Society before, his total savings now approached £3,000. It had truly been a long time since he had so much money. However, by tomorrow, he would have many places to spend money. After putting the money in the safe, Odysseus took a bath, then lay on the bed to review the evening's battle, and then fell into a deep sleep. His consciousness once again appeared in the knowledge wilderness, formed by illusory light. The new week of research began, but after his advancement, the knowledge wilderness seemed to have changed somewhat. Chapter 50, Changes in the knowledge wilderness. Before Odysseus was the familiar knowledge wilderness, with its illusory light, as if it had no concrete form. But in the depths of the wilderness, the light emitted by the towering structure, composed of faintly glowing spheres, no longer seemed so illusory. The entire tower actually appeared to have gained a slight sense of substance. Odysseus paused and observed for a while before entering the tower. The internal changes were not significant, except for the appearance of a teleportation array beside the central simulator. He immediately recognized it as a teleportation array. Immediately, the corresponding operational knowledge entered Odysseus's mind. To be precise, this was an array that allowed the outside world and the knowledge wilderness to communicate. In the real world, as long as a corresponding sub-array was drawn, material from the real world could be teleported into the knowledge wilderness. This was a new ability Odysseus gained in the knowledge wilderness after his advancement. Although it could only teleport inanimate objects, this ability was quite practical. Odysseus exclaimed, "I have space too." His experimental samples and gold coins could all be teleported here. This place was much safer than any bank. He had already planned to draw a fixed array in the basement of his residence, and then draw a portable array on a piece of cloth that he could carry with him at all times. Next, Odysseus touched the central simulator and used his thoughts to search for information. He quickly discovered that his query authority had indeed increased. For example, he could now search for the Sequence 9 and Sequence 8 potion formulas for the Mystery Prior, Savant, and Reader pathways. He hadn't expected the Reader pathway to be added. However, a new problem arose before Odysseus: why only up to Sequence 8? This was quite frustrating. After advancing, he could obtain more potion formulas, but there were no formulas for further advancement. Odysseus was somewhat exasperated. Then, he recalled Russell's diary he had seen earlier and continued to search for the mystical symbols used by the elf. Previously, he couldn't find any information about the elf, but today, he could indeed find the mystical symbols used by the elf. Not only the mystical symbols of the elf, but also those used by the dragon race and giants could be found. Comparing these mystical symbols, Odysseus quickly discovered that the mystical symbols widely used in the North and South continent currently evolved from the mystical symbols of the giant and dragon race Beander groups. They mainly came from the giant race. The dragon race's mystical theories seemed different from those of humanoids, with many dragon elements within their mystical symbols. As for the elf's mystical symbols, they belonged to a completely different system. Odysseus mused. His previous conjecture was correct. The elf came from the West continent, and their mystical concepts were completely different from those of the North and South continent, which is why the elf's arrays appeared to be more powerful. Unfortunately, Odysseus could not yet find the elf's arrays. He could only find the arrays used by human sages in the second epoch, indicating that he would need to advance again to access such knowledge. The arrays used by human sages had clear differences from modern arrays. There were no standards like the six-pointed star, and many arrays were square, trapezoidal, or even polygonal. Their functions were more diverse, and their power was greater than those of today. This also aligned with Odysseus's previous conjecture. With the arrival of the third epoch, the ancient sun god further popularized potion formulas among humans using the blasphemy slate, allowing humans to become Beyonders relatively safely. Then, research into arrays would gradually decrease, and a large amount of related knowledge would eventually disappear into the long river of history. By now, the decorative function of arrays had surpassed their practical use. Odysseus's most core research was actually on spirituality, and those research results gave new applications to forgotten arrays. Although he could only find the mystical symbols of ancient Beander races like the elf, this was already very good for Odysseus. Their mystical symbols were more complete than the existing human magical symbols. Currently, Odysseus's research and deduction on mystical symbols were progressing with great difficulty, and these complete magical symbol systems provided an excellent reference. After making these observations, Odysseus began his research for the day. He decided to put his original topic aside for now and research a new one today: whether Beander knowledge could be extracted from Beander characteristic and instilled into others' brains. After advancing to melee scholar, Odysseus felt the Beander knowledge and combat techniques he gained from Beander characteristic It was a very peculiar experience, acquiring this knowledge without learning, much like the divine bestowal Odysseus had heard of before. Thus, he had a twisted idea. If those mystical knowledge and combat techniques could be instilled into an ordinary person's mind, then that ordinary person would instantly become a mystical expert and combat master. Of course, ordinary people's bodies had not been reshaped by potions, so they would still need a period of training to master those combat techniques. But this was still much simpler than normal practice. The normal way of learning was to comprehend the mysteries of combat through continuous practice. However, if those combat techniques were instilled, one would first possess the corresponding combat experience, and practice would then be a process of practical application, naturally allowing for faster mastery of combat techniques. All of this content is correct. However, even if they mastered those mystical knowledge and combat techniques, because they didn't have the same quick reaction and thinking abilities as a true melee scholar, their abilities would still be far inferior to a true melee scholar. But this was something that could be used on a large scale. If there were enough Beander characteristic and spirituality, theoretically, everyone in Backland could become a mystical expert and combat master. This was just a hypothesis. Odysseus currently only had one Beander characteristic of a melee scholar. If his research succeeded, he only intended to cultivate a few mystical assistants for himself when needed. As his research progressed, Odysseus encountered two difficulties. The first was how to extract knowledge from Beander characteristic. The second was how to instill knowledge into an ordinary person's brain. Fortunately, he could now find some arrays that ancient sages had drawn, among which one array's function was to extract useful Beander information from the corpses of Beander creatures. At that time, humans were very fragile, and their mastery of Beander and mysticism was far inferior to those massive Beander creatures. Thus, their thirst for knowledge led them to invent this array, hoping to obtain the mystical and Beander knowledge they needed after killing Beander creatures. However, this array still required extensive modification to meet Odysseus's requirements. Another problem could be solved with a modern array called telepathy. Sitting in the array, there was a very small chance of perceiving the thoughts of a nearby person. This array required even more modifications and could only be used as a reference. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.